las cosas que el resto del mundo está apenas comenzando a enfrentar. Entonces, me gustaría invitar primero a María Victoria Soto Bauerle, perdón. ¿Sí? Bueno, bienvenida. Bueno, entonces, si está lista, me gustaría invitar a Daniela Manuschevich, espero haber dicho bien su nombre, del Ministerio de Medio Ambiente y también de acá del Departamento de Geografía de la Universidad de Chile. So our first speaker will be Daniela Manuschevich, and she's from the Ministry of Environment and from this university. So, please.
Thank you.
Si necesita usar el mouse, sí, y para cambiar
sí,
con las flechas. Y yo voy a ir traduciendo.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I kind of run in between schedules, so I was just exactly to start my presentation. I work now for the Ministry of the Environment. I'm the head of the Division of Natural Resource and Biodiversity. And we are in a very crucial moment, I would say, for the institutional development. So I wanted to focus my presentation on what we are doing, particularly in water and biodiversity. Well, what I want to show you is first, how can we think about this? Why biodiversity is important for resilience? What do we know about ecological theory? What do we know about common reality, and how we can connect those two? Second, very briefly, about the institutional environmental structure that we have in Chile, a little bit of water governance from the perspective of the Ministry of Environment, international agreements, and how we are advancing in the ecological representation of different ecosystems. And finally, briefly, I will introduce the implementation of the new service of biodiversity and protected areas. Well, I wanted to start with a picture. This is news. News was at some point. And it says, look how is the one specific place in Santiago, due to extreme water events, very strong and fast water running into a place that was full of trash. This picture for me is a good representation on what does it mean, the triple crisis. On one hand, we have extreme weather events. On the other hand, we don't have any water management and no biodiversity management on the riverside. And on the third hand, we have a pollution crisis. And all of this come together into something that people can live and feel. And I think that's very important, because sometimes we tend to focus on things that are a little bit abstract, doesn't make sense to the people. So I think this is one of the key examples of what we are talking when we are talking about triple crisis. Biodiversity, I won't go into this detail, but I just wanted to mention that commonly we tend to think about biodiversity in terms of how many species we have. And we have the environmental reviews of the projects, and we count species. And we count species that we can see. And normally those species have two eyes or are plants, and that's the end. But biodiversity is much more than that, because it's not only the number of species, is how they relate to each other, is how they function in the landscape, is the genetic structure. We can have only one species, but the biodiversity also means how different are among them. Even in this room, how different are we? That means we are the same species, but still we would count as one species, but we're different between us. And that is important, because that is the potential for adaptation. If we don't have biodiversity, we don't have potential for adaptation. So that's one of the key messages that I want to leave. And I want to leave it with a very simple example. Have you played Jenga? Who have not played Jenga? Okay, everyone have played Jenga, great. Well, you know in Jenga, what is the game? You are pulling out these pieces of wood and you see whether the towel falls or not. Well, biodiversity is kind of the same. We are pulling out species, we are pulling out genetic biodiversity, we are pulling out until the whole thing collapses. We don't want to see it collapse, right? We want to see it in a structure that can function even if you move the table. So that is an easy way. I didn't create this example. I saw it in the COP in Cali, of communicating what do we mean when we mean resilience. This is the structure that supports all the ecological, social, and economic process. If we keep pulling out the pieces, we will fall. Now, going into the main thing, how do we work in Chile with, in the Ministry of the Environment and the general structure of the institutional relations? And this is really important because, in Chile, there is kind of this imaginary that the executive power can do whatever it wants, and that's not true. What we really have, we have three powers, right? We have legislative power, we have the executive power, and we have judicial power. And those three are really the institutional structure for the environment. So the Ministry of the Environment is in charge of developing all the policies and regulations in terms of water, air, biodiversity, soil, etc. Then this is overseen by the Council of Ministers for Sustainability. And related to this, we have one service who is in charge of approving or rejecting environmental projects. When there is disagreement, or strong disagreements in terms of whether one project is good or not, it tends to go to the Comité de Ministros, which is different from Consejo, okay? The environmental service evaluation also, they are the one who receives the project, review the projects, approve it or reject it. Then, once a project is approved and it's working, La Superintendencia oversees that all of what was promised in the project is done. Whether we promise that we don't have any impact on any species or water or soil, they are in charge of seeing that that will happen. And now we have the Service of Protected Areas and Biodiversity that is in charge, and I will go into detail later, about the protection of biodiversity in protected areas and outside protected areas. And that is a whole new development because in general we tend to think that biodiversity is in the national parks and nowhere else. And that's not true. We know biodiversity is everywhere and we need to take care everywhere. Well, then you have all, this is mostly how the executive works, but then if you have a project that was rejected or a wetland that was declared and you don't agree for whatever reason in how this was done, you can go to the environmental court, thank you. The environmental court, and if you don't agree on that, you can go to Supreme Court, yeah, which is mostly what is happening with some very key projects. All of this is the environmental governance, not only this. So anything, or mostly of the things that now, with the current law, are done by the Ministry of the Environment are overseen by the Consejo de Ministros and, in some cases, by the judiciary power. Okay? So that's a point I want to leave on the table. And I want also to put this also on your mind, because Chile, in the current constitution, works under the legality principle. And it's based on a vision of freedom, basically, that the state can only do what the law says them to do. But if you're private, you can only, if you're a private person, meaning you're not the state, you can do anything that the law doesn't prohibit. Meaning, you as a person can, I don't know, I can't think of a good example now, but Let's do it the other way. Sometimes we have a wetland. And if you go to field, that probably you will see. Why is the Ministry of the Environment not taking care of or taking revision of the provisions that we have for protected wetlands? And they go to Ceremi, which is the delegate for in the region. And why the Ceremi is not doing what he has to do? Because he can't. Because what should be doing, who should be doing, is la superintendencia. And that it's very important because we can do only what the law mandates. And who oversees that? Judiciary power. Yeah? So something that is not saying the law cannot be done by the state. In the opposite, I'm a private killing dogs, to say an example. If there isn't a law that prohibits that, nobody can say anything to them. Because that is the principle of legality in liberal terms. Now, let's go into water. So, important things, Ministry of the Environment is a piece. Second, the legality principles, we can only do what we are mandated to do, we cannot do otherwise. Okay, so what tools do we have to protect water quality? And I wanted to separate water quality for human health, meaning that you go into a river and you don't get sick, from water for ecosystem purposes, meaning that we take care of the ecosystem itself. So first, let's say that we have a lake and we have a factory. First, this factory to be built up after some 90-some year needs to go to evaluation assessment. If they pass, it's built, okay. But then you have emission, I'm not sure, emission norms. So you can put in the water this and this and this and that, and it's to be monitoring all the time and reported to la superintendencia. Then you have the secondary water quality measures that goes into taking care that the ecosystem is working. The primary already mentioned is for the health of the people, basically, and that it's more area of the Ministry of Health. And then we have these secondary norms. Currently, we have, national laws require one standard. We get sick everywhere in the same way, makes sense. But ecosystems do not have one standard norm. Why? Well, because in the north doesn't rain and we have certain types of soil, because in the south it's different, and so on, and we have different biodiversity. So we need to work by watersheds. And these are the watersheds that we are okay now. The ones that we hope that get into active, let's say, is Valdivia and Huasco. Valdivia is very, very well, if someone wants to study a classical, interesting case about environmental struggles, you can go to see what's going on in Valdivia. And we are currently developing all these other laws. Golfo de Arauco, I would also, I think it's kind of interesting. And North Patagónicos is the first law that goes into the south-south. And those lakes are very special because they are kind of still pristine. And probably you will know later about the geological process that helped to have this. If some lake is polluted, what we need to activate un plan de descontaminación. That is, we need to recover the standards and quality of the water that we have before. And now we are going to have Maipo declare under plan de descontaminación. And if you think Maipo is huge, huge, huge watershed, it starts here up in Santiago and then runs all the way to the sea. It's probably half of the population impacted, the half of the country will be impacted by this law because half of the population more or less live in Santiago. So it's really huge and it's really challenging. I will go into wetlands very briefly because I know it's also something very interesting. We recently have a new law that came out in pandemia. And it was really hard to implement because pandemia, we also have drought. But basically, this law says we need to protect wetlands that overlap with urban areas, whether it's fully or partially. And that implies this is one of the few things that doesn't go and is not overseen by Consejo de Ministros. So what happens if not overseen? What is the check and balance of something that is not overseen by the other ministers? What do you think? Based on what I mentioned before. Who oversees? What is the check? So Ministry of the Environment can create any wetland wherever it wants? Is the tribunales ambientales. So someone, or let's say the Ministry of the Environment, after a long process, declares one wetland. But it's in my house, and I was planning to make a beautiful house, and now you have to go to the environmental evaluation system. What? No. I will go to the environmental, los tribunales ambientales to claim that this is not a wetland. And we have a lot of fun with that. Because every time we declare some wetland, you can have any, this is called reclamaciones. Because that point is not a wetland, because that point is not a wetland. You went to field and see that it's actually a wetland, because people tend to think that wetlands are the water that you can see. But we have established other criteria. For example, that when you do barreno, yeah, you dig into it, you will see molting. That the species growing there depends on water. Well, then we have a lot of fun because then it drains a lot and it moves. It's not say the lawyers doesn't like moving things. What we have in this map is how many we have to declare. Well, where are the most wetlands located? And of course, it's Valparaíso because we have most of the population, and so there's more people claiming that there needs to be more wetlands. And is Los Ríos, because it rains a lot, and some people say that it's entire wetland. I would say no, it's not, and so we have a lot of fun with that. Any questions until there? I think this example kind of shows how the environmental system works, because it's an exception. Because it's tribunales ambientales who made the checks and balance.
So I have one question about Valparaiso.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that a lot of wetlands have been lost to urbanization, and hence there is a need to, there's a this desire to do more, or are you saying there's still enough wetlands there?
No, the thing with the entire region is that first is kind of the limit between Mediterranean and dry climate. So when it rains a lot, much water. When it doesn't rain, kind of the whole region you see less water. You have most of the population, and it's normally you can have wetland declaration in two ways. One, because the Ministry of the Environment wants to do it, or second, because the municipality wants to declare it. So in municipalities that you have a lot of people, very active, lots of NGO, the municipalities are pressured to declare, or to ask to the Ministry of the Environment to declare more wetlands. So it's kind of human and nature. Well, you could say, because no one is pushing to declare, and there is no urban limits to that, the law doesn't apply. So now we talk about urban wetlands and rural wetlands. That doesn't make sense to me. It's just because of the law. They are wetlands. They don't live in cities or not. But that's what happens, and there are also a lot of reclamations over those because there's a lot of people. Any other question? Okay. Another very important thing that people look a lot and ask a lot are protected areas. We like to protect areas because that's how we protect biodiversity. Also, Chile is part of the three conventions, right? Climate change, biodiversity, land degradation. And these conventions are called the Daughters of Rio, because they were created in Rio and were ratified in 1994 by Chile. Every few years, we meet together and we discuss what are going to be the goals for these conventions. The last one was in Colombia. We already had the previous agreement on the global biodiversity framework, and it's 23 goals that each country needs to reach by 2030, which is very short. But in general, I know that in Chile it sounds like we are not doing a lot, but from the international arena, Chile is known as a regional leader in conservation. It's part of the High Ambition Coalition, meaning that it's one of the few countries to say, yes, I will protect 30% of the land and so on. That is one of the most known goals that says we're going to protect 30% of the area of every ecosystem. Why 30? Because there is scientific evidence that shows that if you protect 30% of the area, the likelihood of losing species falls a lot. So that's why it's that. But it's not only protecting, because in Chile we still have this problem that we declare some protected area, as for example in the upper part of Santiago. You go there and you probably won't find anyone. You don't find any guardaparque, ranger. Thank you. So what's the point? Well, the difference is that they have now to go through a different way when there is some evaluation break, but besides that, it's not a lot. So with correct and effective management, it needs to have true management, meaning that has a ranger, has infrastructure, have management plan, etc. What do we have now protected? Well, in marine ecosystem, we are excellent. Why? Because we have Rapa Nui protected, we have Nazca Desventuradas, which is another island. If we add all of that, excellent. We now just approved the management plan for Rapa Nui, which included indigenous consultation, very intense. We made it. Good. What happens if we go to the coastal area? And that is not so good. I don't know if you can really see the number, but for example, if we go to the northern part, Humboldtiana, which is some specific region that is mostly north of Chile in the coastal area, we have 0.001 of the protected areas, which is nothing. Yeah? Now we just declared Humboldt, multiple areas use. We are a little bit better, but we still need to do the management plan. Still, Chile is a leader. It's doing way more than other countries. If we go, I don't know what happened here. Well, but if we go to land in general, Patagonia, perfect. We are mostly over 30, good. But if we go north, in particular, bosque sclerophyll forest, we're really bad. So we need to focus on the north and in central area, close to Santiago. What problem do you think that we might have in trying to preserve and create areas near Santiago? Who? Go.
It's more densely populated.
Exactly. And there's more industry, and it's way more complex. So we are trying to find ways such as other effective measures of conservation, which is another way that you have, for example, is not everything is not public, it's private, or you have some measure of protecting this area, so that we can increase the level of protection in those areas. Oh no, here it is. So it's basically from Matorral Chileno till the desert, we are really bad. But I don't know if you heard about the national strategy of lithium. Yeah? The world needs to go to renewables, and for renewables we need lithium, right? And we have lithium, we have a lot. What are we doing? As the national strategy of lithium was declared, we are also working on protecting specific salares, basically, so that we have on one hand a productive, I want to say productive production, but it doesn't sound good. When a productive increase, we have more complex area, we want to have batteries and so on, but we are also protecting 30% of those wetlands. If you can imagine, this is very complicated because you really need to negotiate with basically mining, and mining is part of the economic structure of Chile. But the interesting thing about those wetlands is that most of them have unique biodiversity, those biodiversity that you won't see with your eyes. Biochemical biodiversity. We're talking about groups of species that you don't find it anywhere. And even some researchers mentioned that this is kind of how the Earth was millions of years ago. So probably you have a lot of potential in terms of biotechnology. And that's why there is also a strategy to develop biotechnology in Chile hand in hand with artificial intelligence. So we're working in the north, in the center, but I want to focus now on the new law, very briefly, La Ley para la Naturaleza, which is the new service that took 14 years to be approved. So now we have environmental, the judiciary, evaluation and assessment, overseeing, and now national parks and biodiversity service. Why is this important? Well, it takes part of CONAF, not the entire CONAF, only the ones who take care of the national parks, and is within new service that will be overseen by the Ministry of the Environment, and will take care of all areas that now are under the Ministry of Economy, for example, fishing areas, or different sort of areas that are on the different ministries, which implies a whole nightmare even for the people who want to apply for investment projects. Also, we are aligning this to the convention I mentioned before, which is the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Agreement in 22, and it's part of long-term compromisos that Chile made with the OECD. What does it have? Well, it creates a whole new regulation, instruments, and financing for biodiversity. Takes all these spare protected areas that, for example, you have one managed CNAF, the other the Servicio Nacional de Pesca, bienes nacionales, and put them all together, which imply also a lot of administration. Instrument for the recovery of the species and protection of invasive species. Now we are working from this, well, we create the service, good, but we now need to develop the whole structure of the service, and we are working on that, but also all the regulations. We have to create more or less, now we are thinking 14 bylaws that need to go to Consejo de Ministros, then approve, and then a whole administrative process. This is, generally speaking, how does a bylaw needs to go. We need to create the project, public consultation, indigenous consultation if needed, definite project, and Consejo de Ministros here. Now I won't go into this, don't have time. In summary, this new service will take care of protected areas and biodiversity outside protected areas. And I want to focus just lastly on that. Outside protected areas is private mostly. What can we do there? Economic instruments. For example, take care of degraded lands, endangered ecosystem, marine conservation. How? Creating and recognizing sustainable practices, certification system, and the well-known payment for ecosystem services or retributions for ecosystem services. And we are doing it for 5 pillars. Equity. It's not the same for the big NGO that has a lot of private areas than for the small farmer that didn't know probably this law existed. Transparency. The whole thing needs to be accountable. This is kind of a thing like carbon trading, but it's not carbon trading. It needs to be credible. If the system is not credible, it won't work. It needs to be flexible. It's not the same to be one user and a small user. It's not the same the north and the south. And it needs to be gradual. If you improve your practices, if you improve your production, good. We are going to give you more recognition. Just to close on the main idea, biodiversity and resilience. This is very technical, so I think I don't have time to go into that. But the more species we have, the more different they are, the more genetic difference we have, more likely is that we can sustain any process, including productive processes such as pollination that is mentioned in this graph. Thank you. Historically, you know that the first creation of protected area, both in Chile and Argentina, didn't talk a lot with indigenous people. That is true. Now, there are many processes that regulate how we relate to the creation of the system or development of the system. But now, in Patagonia, most of the area were created even before all of that existed. What we are trying to do now is, in the management plans, incorporate and develop with indigenous people. But it's way harder than it sounds, because it's a diverse group of people. There are other, well, you know, you have a lot of salmon production in the south. There is a lot of tension on that, because that provides a lot of jobs. So it's not something easy. It's very complicated. It's regulated, and also requires a lot of public research, because you need to go to consult, you need to develop scientific methodology, you need to translate, you need to do a whole thing. So it's something that we're trying to take care of, but it's extremely complex. Well, the same in the lithium strategy, because all those los salares, there are indigenous peoples there too. So we are now developing the consultation with them, but it's not something easy. In some cases, in particular, some indigenous people have sometimes they know better than land. They have a lot of judicial resources, and it's really complicated.
I want to ask, I mean, all the laws and institutions seems to be like in a right direction, but I want to know, like, what are the main challenges to put them, or for them to work in practice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
what is happening that the results sometimes are not the ones expected?
Necesitamos que hable por el micrófono para que quede registrado en el...
Ah, perdón. Well, the answer will be kind of obvious. It's resources and it's people. Because, for example, we are creating this certification system. The state cannot take care of going to each and single landowner and see whether they are doing what they have to do. What we probably will have to do is to, ¿cómo se dice licitar? Licitar. Bid them, so put it in the public, so someone else will go and see it and we will pay to that person. But anyway, we need to keep an eye on that, because if the credibility of that system is lost, it doesn't make any point. So to be effective, Really what we need is to develop a system that is extremely efficient and with few people can really oversee national areas, certification process, administrative process, etc. And that's on one layer. On the second layer, I would say that is more kind of political, because at least in Chile, there is like this perception that not everywhere, but in the press, that if we protect something, people cannot work. But really what we need to do is to develop a system that people can go work in tourism, biotechnology, and make the whole productive system more complex. It's hard, it's super hard. But I would say that is the only way to go beyond that idea that if you preserve, conserve, or manage natural areas, you can do anything.
You mentioned a little bit on how you kind of have to choose between mining for lithium and protecting biodiversity. Both of them are important for renewable energy because lithium's for batteries. So I'm just wondering how in the future, if the government has to make a choice between mining for lithium and protecting these species, I'm just wondering if you have any insight on how the government or like the environmental agencies might make this decision.
I'm thinking how to answer that question because there are many levels. And I think how you are thinking in terms of time. If I'm thinking something that I need the money now, I will take one decision. But if I'm thinking that I want to have money in 30 years, I will take probably a different decision. And so it's mostly a thing of time present, but with the potential of the future. And I wouldn't say there is a rule on that. It's more of doing it and trying to balance what we need now with what we can do in 30 years.
Daniela, given that you mentioned the principle of legality and mining, I would like to ask you, how do this new environmental law and institutionality relate to mining law in terms of hierarchy? Because any private person who owns land, or even someone who doesn't own the land, has the permit to do mining exploration too. So how does the environmental regulation relate to mining regulation?
Still, the mining code, it's stronger than almost any law. But there are now, and this is more of an ongoing discussion, of you have protected areas and areas under protection. And I know it sounds funny, but the difference between them is that one is a protected area, period. But the other is water area under protection, such as wetlands. And the water code says that from mostly in the north, if you have an area under protection, they apply some restriction mostly to water use. To exploration, nothing, not a lot can be done. But at least to the water that is required for the production, I would say that would be different for the areas under official protection that are not only national parks, are degraded areas, wetlands, aquifers, and two more. I don't remember.
Would it also then affect would the quality of the water also be regulated if that is under production?
Now we just approved the secondary water quality norm for Huasco. And Huasco has mining in the upper side. So with the new law, no. But as we develop secondary norms, going north, there's always harder, we will probably have more, well, first you have to have monitoring. So to create an anteproyecto, you first need to have a huge set of data. If you don't have that, means the Consejo de Ministros will say, I don't know what you're talking, we don't know if the arsenic is normal or is pollution. So first you need to have data, then you have to, well, do a whole administrative process, public participation, indigenous participation, then put that out, respond to that, create the final project, and go to Consejo de Ministros.
Daniela, related with the first question, in the North Patagonia or Patagonia, what is the relation of the ministry with the salmon farm, in the fjords, in the very, very pristine ecosystem and water? During the pandemic and currently, the salmon production is increasing. That is the warning, the preoccupation of the ministry and what we can do to stop that. Sorry.
Yeah, you put me in a complex, I will have to answer very generally later, maybe we can talk, but the ministry creates regulations and programs and policies. The ones who oversee the production in particular are la superintendencia. We don't oversee that. The things that because we need to have this independence, right? I cannot design something and then myself, ministry, or someone else, go and check that that is happening. We say, this is what should be done, and superintendencia say, it is done or not. And what they declare, and depends on the area, and they measure the lack of oxygen and other measures, and that works into a different road. That's what I can answer.
Okay, so I have one question on the slide just before this one, which I found very intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And this, for everybody, for the students here, this is the work that Kate Duffy did for her PhD, or part of the work that she did. So if I understand this correctly, you're looking at thermal performance curves and potentially of insects or pollinators, those kind of things, right? So in Chile, what has been your experience in terms of either climate change or other human-driven change impacting these
Pollinators?
pollinators, insects, whatever you're looking at?
Well, this is not a paper from Chile, it's more a theoretical paper, and exactly what it shows is that, well, this is niche, right? So how much the reproductive performance of different species under increasing temperature. So the papers say if we lose the butterfly, the whole range of tolerance for an increased temperature will be reduced. If we keep the butterfly, the whole niche amplitude will increase because it's a symmetry. I'm not sure if I understood the question more from the science point or more from the policy point.
Either way.
Well, I know that Instituto de Ecología y Biodiversidad have done a lot of research on pollinators and on trees, because trees are also dying, because the whole thing is moving south on up. And well, now in the adaptation plan for climate change in biodiversity, we are trying to consider those measures. And we were developing, for example, the bylaws of to the law. We are trying to incorporate potential changes due to climate change. For example, very concrete, we have priority sites. Yeah, there are two types of priority sites in Chile. One is the national, very important, and the second is the regional priority sites. If your project is located into national priority site, then you have to do a different evaluation process. And why those sites are important? Because we say there's a refuge for biodiversity or something, but those were done like 15 years ago in some cases. In the future, we need to develop models, for example, that identifies areas that are key for various species and put them under some degree of protection, because we know those will be important in the future. So that's kind of how we can overlap those two things. In Antarctica, we know, for example, that probably because of climate change, invasive species will go south and probably will go to Antarctica. So what we need to do is to have phytosanitary measures to avoid the entrance of invasive species.
Is there a reason why you use Gaussian curve other than, normal distribution?
Oh, no, this is just conceptual. Sí.
Thank you very much for a nice presentation and for the answers to the questions. Let's check the slide here. So next we'll have María Victoria Soto Bauerle, pardon. And I'll put your presentation. Listo. Yeah, we just had a small change in the schedule because Daniela and Maria will have to leave a bit earlier, so that's why we're having questions after each presentation. So after her presentation, we'll have a coffee break, and then after that, discussion.
Good morning. Sorry, but my English is not good. Then the presentation will be in Spanish. And Lena translated for me. Thank you. Lo que voy a presentar hoy día son temas que nosotros conocemos y que son bastante obvios. Pero a veces los temas más obvios y de pequeña escala son desconocidos y a veces son enmascarados.
So what I will be presenting today are some topics which may seem very obvious, but maybe even because they're so obvious, and sometimes they're hidden in what we see in the day-to-day and what we think about.
De hecho, el título es Reconociendo, es decir, cómo nosotros miramos, vemos, analizamos ciertas formas del territorio, pero con una nueva mirada de acuerdo a los cambios que han habido en los últimos 50, 60 años.
So that's why the title is to recognize. Maybe it's things we already know, we're already cognizant of them, but we're recognizing things that we've maybe already known for 50, 60 years, and we're bringing it into today's context.
Este es un ejemplo de algo que sucedió el año pasado y antepasado, pero que nosotros que trabajamos en procesos geomorfológicos estábamos esperando, ¿no es cierto?, que sucediera en algún momento. Esto es una duna relicta, ¿ya? Y esto es lo que pasa hoy día con la duna relicta.
So this is a phenomenon that we saw in the past couple of years. However, it's something that geographers, geomorphologists have been expecting for quite a long time because it is a relic dune.
Sí, es una duna relicta que fue urbanizada, ¿ya? Era un área que fue protegida, pero fue desprotegida y por lo tanto fue urbanizada. Y quedó claro que ahora no se pueden urbanizar las dunas.
So it's a relic dune that was previously protected, but it became unprotected and became urbanized. And after construction was made on it, you can see what happened. And this is a lesson that dunes should actually not be urbanized. Yes. So we were here 2 days ago. We were there 2 days ago.
Ese es un ejemplo de que la naturaleza nos enseñó de que tenemos que remirar los territorios.
So nature is telling us to re-look or also recognize the territories.
Otro concepto importante para todos es que nosotros vivimos en paisajes heredados de condiciones climáticas ambientales del pasado. Por ejemplo, esto es el desierto, pero nosotros vemos la acción del agua con cambios climáticos que ocurrieron durante al menos los últimos 2 millones de años.
So one thing we have to recognize here is that we're living in a landscape that we've inherited from past climatic times. So this looks like a desert, but you can see the evidence of water carving the landscape, which happened over the last 2 million years.
Y vemos también cómo, debido a las buenas condiciones climáticas y presencia de agua, que cada vez es menos porque estamos en los 27 grados de latitud, hay una actividad agrícola, agroindustrial muy intensiva.
We can see that due to the adequate conditions of climate and having some water, which is always less and less, there is a very strong presence of agroindustries.
Aquí vemos un cerro que fue convertido en una terraza, o sea, cortaron la punta del cerro para generar la superficie de producción.
Here we see a hill that was converted into a terrace, so they flattened the hill on top to make a production area.
Esta es una foto del año 2007 y vemos cómo se está aterrazando, cómo se están aplanando las montañas de los Andes para producir uvas de exportación.
So here we can see hills in the Andes that are being flattened for production of grapes for export.
El problema es que estamos en una cuenca altoandina. Aquí tenemos un suelo que le ha tomado algunos miles de años en desarrollarse y todo esto entonces ha sido degradado y hemos generado mucha masa disponible para que cuando haya un evento climático sea puesta en movimiento.
So I also forgot to mention this was an image from 2007, and here you can see on the left side of the image the natural soil, which has been built up over many, many years. However, when we move that soil, flatten it, then the soil is disturbed, and if there's an intense event, then that can also cause movement of the soil.
Otra cosa importante para los que vivimos en este lado del planeta, del continente, es que nuestra principal estructura es la cordillera de los Andes y consecuentemente nosotros vivimos en cuencas hidrográficas.
So another important characteristic for people living on this side of the continent is that the main structure here is the mountain range of the Andes. And so in this context, we're living in watersheds that are coming down from the mountain range.
Sí, ahora, nosotros no vivimos necesariamente en las laderas, vivimos en los valles, ¿ya? En los valles en las partes planas, cercanas a los ríos.
So we mostly don't live on the hill slopes, we more live in the valleys, in areas close to the rivers.
Desde el punto de vista entonces metodológico, analítico, debemos pensar que existen cuencas enormes, grandes, chicas, medianas, microcuencas, subcuencas, ¿ya? Pero ¿qué significa esto?
So from an analytical perspective, we have to think that there are, we live in watersheds of various sizes. There are some really big watersheds, some sub-watersheds, micro-watersheds. And so what does this mean to us in a more operational way?
Y eso tiene que ver con, por ejemplo, el reconocimiento del tamaño de los territorios que vamos a estudiar. Por ejemplo, nosotros no podemos comparar nuestra gran cuenca del Maipo que mencionó Daniela con la gran cuenca del Río de la Plata o la cuenca del Amazonas.
So this puts a bit of context in how are we going to look at these watersheds, how can we study them. That, for example, the great cuenca, the great watershed of the Maipo River, which passes through here in Santiago, we can't study that exactly in the same way that we would study a larger watershed like the Río de la Plata, which is in Argentina, or the Amazon River Basin, which is one of the biggest in the world.
Entonces, desde el punto de vista del análisis de los territorios, en términos de la resiliencia, de los cambios climáticos, de los eventos que están ocurriendo, aquí lo más importante es tener en cuenta el concepto de escala espacial y de escala temporal.
So, in this context of climate change, one of the most important things that we need to think about is scale. So we're thinking about spatial scale, different sizes of catchments, and time scale or temporal scale.
Un ejemplo de ello es esto, es en 27 grados de latitud. Esto es la costa de Copiapó. Aquí tenemos una micro cuenca muy muy pequeña, pero que está conectada con los Andes costeros. Y esta pequeña cuenca puede destruir en algún momento con un evento extremo en el desierto costero, puede destruir la conectividad de la ruta 5, que es el principal eje de conexión del país.
So here we're seeing a microcatchment, a coastal microcatchment in Copiapó in Chile, and despite it being a very small catchment that its headwaters are in the coastal Andean range, it has the capacity to destroy connectivity to the city because of the Route 5, which is passing through near the bottom of the catchment.
Sí, y esto puede ocurrir porque generalmente no somos capaces de identificar aquellas pequeñas unidades del territorio que pueden reactivarse muy rápidamente frente a un evento extremo.
So, one thing that it's important to also think about these small areas is because sometimes in our analysis, if we're looking at large scales, we don't realize that even these small areas can cause a problem such as this problem of connectivity, which is a problem at a larger scale, especially under extreme events.
Sí. Y otro fenómeno sumamente importante que tenemos acá es que en el territorio viven personas, ¿ya? Y aquí tenemos que post pandemia surgió espontáneamente un asentamiento informal, ¿ya? Donde en un área que está, aquí se ve el paleodrenaje, todo esto va a activarse, va a responder a un evento extremo, donde con esta población que está aquí y que además está 3 metros bajo el terraplén de la Ruta 5, es decir, se va a generar teóricamente en un evento extremo un pequeño lago.
So what we can see here is that after the pandemic, informal sediment was formed in this area. You can see old, like paleo paths of where water has flowed in the past, and that if there is an extreme event, if there's an extreme rain event, that these channels would again be filled with water. If this happens, you can see in the lower image that this drainage point that passes under Route 5 would then become a small lake because water would be captured behind this point and not be able to flow out, affecting this informal sediment that is formed in this low area.
Este es un problema bastante frecuente que tenemos en la actualidad. Pasemos ahora a otra área. Esto es 30 grados en un afluente del río Elqui. Esta es la localidad de Lambert, localizada ni más ni menos que aquí, ¿ya? En el lecho del río.
So now we're moving 3 degrees north. The last site was at 27 degrees, south. The last site was at 27 degrees south. Now we're moving to 30 degrees south in the Elqui River Basin. And we're going to talk about a point that is just right on the plain of the river.
Para que ustedes entiendan, todo lo que es en estos colores amarillos y verdes corresponden al tiempo geológico Holoceno, es decir, los últimos 10.000 años, es decir, es muy nuevo, está en funcionamiento, ¿ya? Pero 10.000 años para nosotros es mucho, pero en el tiempo geológico es nada, y para la naturaleza tampoco.
So what you can see here in the sort of greenish, yellowish colors are sediment formations that have just formed since the Holocene. So maybe 10,000 years, which is very, very short in terms of geological timescale. So for nature and geology, it's basically just like very recent, basically immediate change.
Nosotros hemos trabajado bastante estas cuencas, tratando de explicar algunos fenómenos bien particulares frente a eventos extremos y que tienen que ver con un fenómeno particular de las áreas de desierto o del semiárido que hemos hipotetizado que podría ser la hidrofobia del suelo.
So we've been working a lot in these catchments. We've studied them well, and we're learning about a phenomenon that we call the hydrophobicity of the soil.
Esto significa que, por ejemplo, estas áreas de ríos con mucha rodados con material gruesos, en invierno tienen una muy buena capacidad de infiltración, pero los eventos extremos de de finales del verano y principios de otoño, que son los que estamos viendo ahora, estas cuencas no hay una infiltración, muy por el contrario, hay una inmediata escurrimiento superficial generando flash flood.
So what we can see in the rubble in the riverbed is that during the winter with more moderate rain events, there's quite good infiltration. However, in this time of year, kind of end of summer, beginning of fall, then water is not infiltrating and you're having extreme flash floods with rapid discharge.
Y aquí nosotros vemos el efecto del flash flood en un río, ¿no es cierto? Acuérdense, un río heredado de tiempos antiguos, donde se inundó el pueblo de Lambert y luego, el 2017, nuevamente el río se reactivó y el pueblo de Lambert no se inundó, pero fue erosionado lateralmente.
Here we can see that this ancient riverbed has been reactivated in these extreme rain events. And in 2017, it's beginning to flood this populated area and eroding the riverbanks.
Y aquí tenemos una foto de una línea del tiempo de la cuenca, cómo fue apareciendo el agua durante el día. En marzo, con solo 23 milímetros en 24 horas.
So we can see here a small timeline of a flash flood where increase of 23.3, oh no, fue lluvia de
23.
Sorry, precipitation of 23.3 millimeters in just 24 hours created this event.
Entonces, los umbrales de precipitación que tenemos también para las cuencas son nuevos umbrales que los estamos recién conociendo.
So these thresholds of precipitation that we're reaching in these small watersheds are some that we have never seen before. It's a new phenomenon.
Sí, y es un enorme desafío, sobre todo cuando nos enfrentamos a la situación de Copiapó, que es la capital regional, en los 27 grados, y vean ustedes dónde está ubicada.
So this is especially a big challenge in Copiapó, which is 27 degrees south, because you can see where it's located with the range.
Es una cuenca absolutamente modelada por el agua, durante los últimos 2 millones de años y mucho antes, pero que ahora es parte del desierto, ¿ya? Es el límite del desierto, pero aquí llueve en verano con un fenómeno cut-off low, que es un nuevo fenómeno climático que no conocíamos antes y que genera enormes impactos en esta zona. Y a ello agregamos el crecimiento desregulado hacia las partes altas de las cuencas.
So in this city, which is the capital city of this region of Copiapó, we can see that it's a micro or a microcuenca, ¿verdad?
Sí, puede ser.
Yeah, a micro catchment that is very much shaped by water in the past. And that we expect that with these new meteorological events that are very extreme, that all these channels of water that have been formed in the past will become reactivated. It becomes even more of an issue because the city is constantly expanding, sometimes with these informal settlements, closer and closer to the mountain range.
Sí. Hicimos una serie de estudios, modelizamos, aquí vemos el Stream Power Index, principalmente relacionado con la dirección del agua y la erosión lineal, ¿ya? Y además el plano urbano de la ciudad de Copiapó.
So we've done some studies looking into the stream power index under different events, and you see it here on the city of Copiapó.
Y este es el más importante de todos, en donde se modelizó las áreas inundables ante un evento extremo. ¿Y qué podemos ver? La superposición entre las áreas de inundación y el plano urbano.
So this is one of the most important maps that we produced, where we made a model of the potential flooding areas of the city. And you can see where flooding can occur superimposed on the map, the urban plan of the city.
Y bueno, esto fue lo que ocurrió. El río Copiapó, la plaza de Copiapó, y aquí viene lo más terrible, ¿ya?
Yeah, so you see what happened in the images, the river of Copiapó, the central park of Copiapó, and now the worst part.
Esto es la parte baja de la cuenca del río Copiapó, que es una enorme cuenca andina.
This is the lowest or outlet point of the catchment of Copiapó.
Sí, en donde aquí es lo importante. La ciudad fue tomando el río, estrangulando el río y le quitó amplitud y además lo dejó relleno, colmatado. Es decir, cuando hubo estos eventos extremos, el río no tenía la capacidad para llevar ese enorme caudal de agua y masa.
So where this river passes through the city has been encroaching on the cross-section of the river. You can see that the space that the river may have had in the past has been reduced, and that the riverbed itself has been slowly filled with what's coming down the river as well, and that because of that, the total capacity of the river to transport water and sediments has been reduced.
Exacto. Entonces, esta interrogación, esta pregunta es, ¿cuál es el ancho que tiene que tener un río intervenido? ¿Cuál es la profundidad que debe tener un río urbano para que en el siguiente evento extremo no haya una inundación fluvial en la ciudad?
So the question here is, what width does a river, an urban river need to have, and what depth does it need to have to be able to transport this amount of water and sediment?
Y esa respuesta tiene que ser, como yo decía al principio, reconociendo que han habido cambios en el paisaje en los tiempos históricos, ¿ya? Y que las tasas de retorno, los periodos de retorno tienen que ser recalculados con datos que no tenemos, porque son parte de la incerteza de la variabilidad climática de los eventos extremos.
Yeah, so this calculation of this width and depth needs to be done taking into account new thresholds, let's say,
Yes.
because we're projecting into the future climate that's going to be different, and we don't know what those thresholds will be. So those return periods of rainfall, of flooding, are changing in the future. Sí.
Eso. Esta es una imagen muy clásica y es muy importante que ustedes la tengan presente porque esto es el perfil de un río, ¿ya? Esto está en todos los textos. Pero lo importante es que este modelo, si ustedes se fijan, no tiene alturas, no tiene profundidades, no tiene ninguna métrica, ¿ya?
So you should keep this image in mind. This is a cross-section of a river, and it's more natural state. But, of course, it doesn't have a specific height. It doesn't have a specific width. This is going to depend on other factors.
¿Por qué? Porque aquí tenemos dos factores importantes. Uno es, principalmente para ríos tipo braided, que son estos grandes ríos trenzados, en donde nosotros sabemos que aquí adentro no podemos hacer nada porque es el lecho de inundación.
Yeah, especially for, in this case, this is a braided river, and we see that in this, the middle section is the area where it can be flooded, basically. If it's a bit higher flow, this entire area will be covered in water, and there, nothing should be done, nothing should be built.
Sí, es el lecho del río. Pero este lecho del río cambia en función de en qué parte de la cuenca estamos y en qué cuenca hidrográfica y climática nos encontramos. Por lo tanto, este ancho y la altura de la terraza tiene que ser medida, estimada a nivel local frente a los nuevos escenarios de eventos climáticos extremos para evitar inundaciones.
Yeah. So this width of the riverbed and the height of the banks is varies throughout the catchment. It varies also between different catchments. It depends on the climatic conditions, on the slope, on various factors. And it needs to be calculated and estimated for not just the current conditions, but also with projections into the future.
Ya. Aquí yo señalé en rojo estas partes. Esto es una terraza del río que se inunda solo en las grandes crecidas y a veces se genera vegetación, suelo y la falsa imagen de que ahí no se inunda. ¿Ya?
So highlighted in red here, you see parts of the riverbed that actually are not flooding so frequently because they're slightly higher than the rest of the riverbed. And there, sometimes there's some vegetation growing. It looks like it's dry land. However, an extreme event that can flood, it causes this false perception maybe to the population nearby that this is an area that won't flood.
Sí, aquí es un estudio que hizo una estudiante, Francisca González, en donde ella analizó desde el año 2006 hasta el 22 todos los cambios que habían dentro del lecho del río, en el río Tinguiririca, un poco más al sur, un área netamente agrícola. ¿Y qué es lo que vemos? Que efectivamente han habido algunos cambios, ¿no es cierto? Y otras se mantienen permanentemente. ¿Por qué?
Yeah, so one of her students, I guess,
Sí,
Francisca has looked into this in this river, how just the geomorphology of the riverbed itself has changed over some range of years.
Sí, entonces veíamos que habían formas que se mantenían en el tiempo y se iban generando nuevas formas dentro del lecho del río.
So you can see how some of the forms within the riverbed were staying the same over time, whereas there's other ones that were changing with time.
Pero eso tiene una explicación, y es que esto es un estudio de Garreau et al. 2019 que está analizado solamente hasta el año 2018, ¿ya? Del año 2010 al 2018, la mega sequía.
So what we see in this graph is, well, it's also in English there, the regional precipitation index. So you can see starting around 2007,
sí. No,
2007, the start of the mega drought.
Aquí lo importante es cuando se declara mega sequía, 2010. ¿Ya?
So, yeah, the important thing here is when did we declare that the drought started? In 2010.
Y veamos qué es lo que ha pasado con el lecho del río. En términos de aquí comienza la megasequía y vemos que estas áreas, que son estas áreas que se han ido donde no hay precipitaciones, no se han inundado y crece vegetación y comienzan a aumentar estas terrazas dentro del río y además se generan, gracias a las obras de ingeniería, terrazas que denominamos de origen antrópico.
Okay, so you can see in the image from 2006 that this area is part of the riverbed. It is this terrace that maybe some vegetation starts growing there. However, it's still part of the riverbed. And then over time, with this mega drought that's happening since 2010, people are slowly encroaching. You have this anthropogenic influence on the river in the agricultural
Yes.
area, where they're using this terrace.
Sí. Esto es el río Tinguiririca. Aquí se ve esa terraza antrópica. Esto es las áreas, fíjense, con suelo, vegetación, sin inundación. Y esto es el río al año 22.
So now you can see here the terrace with vegetation without flooding. ¿Este es el año?
El año 22.
In 2022,
Sí.
this is how it looked.
Y aquí vemos lo que ocurrió el invierno del 23 con Enzo el Niño, ¿tá? En donde se reactivó el río, absolutamente.
So we can see here then in 2023 with the La Niña event.
El Niño.
Perdón, el Niño event, then the river is completely reactivated, filling the channel again.
Aquí tengo unas preguntas, o sea, ¿existe algún nivel de persistencia? Sí, las formas se mantienen, pero en unos periodos muy cortos y por lo tanto son periodos que están condicionados justamente a que haya una nueva ruptura de equilibrio. ¿Cuándo? No lo sabemos. Cuando haya el siguiente evento extremo.
So we see the question there, is there some level of persistence of the riverbed forms? And that, of course, this equilibrium is only stable for a while, and then when you have the next extreme event, that can be, again, changed.
Aquí yo tenía un ejemplo muy geomorfológico que me lo voy a saltar, ¿ya? Pero quería pasar a esta otra área y para ir terminando. Esto es el río Maipo, este es el río Mapocho, allá. Esta es una imagen del 55. Y miren qué grandes ríos teníamos.
So here you see the river Maipo and the river Mapocho at their confluence. And you see how broad and braided these rivers are.
Y vamos viendo ahora qué es lo que pasó a partir de esta mega sequía, cómo fueron apareciendo de a poco por la falta de lluvia, fueron apareciendo estas áreas que no se inundaban y fueron creciendo, aumentando, aumentando, hasta que llegamos al año 2023 con un uso dentro del lecho del río, ¿ya? Que ya lo vimos en el año 55, con urbanización, agricultura, instalaciones agrícolas, pista de aterrizaje.
So we can see that the red line is the original edge of the river from 1955, and that since then, because of this mega drought that's happening since 2010, and that the terrace, which is within the riverbed, but doesn't flood so often, at least not since 2010, has just grown vegetation, and people have the perception that it's not flooding, that they've slowly encroached on the riverbed, and you see there's small urbanization, there's crops, there's agro-industry, there's even like a what's it called? Runway? Landing strip, yeah. There's even a landing strip. So people have completely begun to use land within the riverbed.
Sí, esto es muy importante. Es cómo la mega sequía nos generó una falsa imagen de que el río ya no se iba a inundar. porque estuvo a partir de 2005-2007, comienza, ¿no es cierto?, la sequía.
So this has generated a false perception for the population that the river won't flood again, that it won't be reactivated, because it just hasn't happened since maybe 2007. However, of course, when we think about the geological timescale,
Sí. ¿Y cuándo fue la última gran crecida? En el Niño del 1982. Y por lo tanto la memoria es corta y la necesidad de usar suelos y territorios hace que la memoria también se invisibilice, la memoria geomorfológica e hidrológica.
So actually the last big flood was in 1982. And so in human memory, that becomes too long ago for people to make decisions based on that. Rather than that, there's also pressure from population, economical pressure, and people have decided to encroach further and further on the river.
Esto ocurrió el 23 y el 24. Ahí aparece, ese es un pequeño chistecito.
So this happened in 2023, 2024, and here's a small joke as well.
Ahí.
Sí. Yeah. So a plane in the river Maipo.
Yes.
For those that didn't believe that there was an aerodrome on the edge of the river.
Y lo que podríamos pensar es que aquí no había un instrumento de planificación, pero sí lo había.
So we might think in this case there wasn't any planning, there wasn't a warning, but there was.
No sé qué pasó, porque yo soy geomorfóloga, no trabajo con gobernanza, afortunadamente.
So she says, I don't know what happened. She's a geomorphologist. She doesn't work with the government. So.
Y esto es nuestro río Maipo en Melipilla, 55 kilómetros aguas abajo.
So this is the same river in Militia, which is 55 kilometers downstream.
Y aquí vemos la erosión de esta terraza que se creó a partir de la sequía, que fue erosionada y perdió aproximadamente 900 metros, o sea, creció mucho y perdió 900 metros.
So here, 55 kilometers downstream, you see the sediments from this terrace, which had been growing over the times between the floods, but then was eroded in the flood event and brought downstream.
Sí. Y esto fue un hallazgo, la verdad es que nos entramos y encontramos esto.
Yeah. So, quite an event that they come and go downstream and see this, like residues from the flood.
Entonces, cuando los geofísicos, los geólogos dicen que no existe el antropoceno, yo digo que sí existe el antropoceno, porque ahí están las evidencias del antropoceno.
So some geographers say that Anthropocene doesn't exist as another era, but if you go and you look and you see in sediment these things, then you can think if there's evidence of it, it's happening.
Esta es una terraza creada por basura.
This is a terrace that's just created of trash.
Y esta es una terraza natural, donde estos depósitos son de origen fluvial, pero arrastrando mucha basura.
So this is another terrace that is of sort of more natural origin. However, the river sediment and the river itself is dragging also a lot of trash, and it's also depositing it.
Entonces, esta es una terraza antrópica, pero esta es una terraza natural.
So this is a completely anthropogenic terrace, and this one is a natural one, but with evidence of...
¿Dónde? En el lecho del río, que solo se inunda en las supercrecidas, ¿ya? Y aquí vemos que encontramos un envase que tenía fecha de elaboración 2004, o sea, tenía prácticamente 20 años esta terraza.
So here in this more natural terrace that was made from sediment depositing, they found a plastic bottle that had the date that it was made from 2004. They're assuming the terrace is then maybe 20 years old.
Entonces, esta realidad la tenemos en todas nuestras cuencas y hay que analizarla a nivel local.
So this phenomenon is happening in all of the watersheds in Chile, and it's something you need to analyze at a local scale.
No puedo dejar de mencionar este otro aspecto de nuestros Andes, y en este caso son los Andes costeros, del batolito costero, que está conformado por rocas graníticas, por rocas muy alteradas, y que tienen además monocultivo forestal y han generado enormes incendios forestales.
So, different, slightly topic, but she can't also avoid mentioning about this other issue, which is forest fires. You see that the bedrock here is mostly granite, which is
Granítico.
and in this landscape, there's a lot of monoculture plantations. I think we saw them also on our drive. A lot of eucalyptus, a lot of pine, and they generate a higher risk of forest fires.
Este batolito es un nombre genérico, general, y este tipo de rocas sufre un tipo de alteración especial, no solamente en Chile, en todo el mundo, y que significa que la roca queda muy blanda y por lo tanto genera, cuando se hacen intervenciones, genera cambios en el perfil de equilibrio de la ladera y se generan landslides a pequeña escala.
So this type of bedrock, batolito costero, is very sensitive to changes, and the structure of it can be affected by human interventions, which can then lead to small landslides.
Esto ocurre en Valparaíso. Esto es lo que pasa luego que terminó el incendio. Nuevamente hacemos cortes en la ladera para hacer estas casas de emergencia, generando las condiciones para un landslide.
So this is what happened after a forest fire in Valparaíso. Then people are building these emergency houses, and again cutting into the subsurface, generating these conditions which can then cause a landslide.
Y aquí lo importante nuevamente es la escala, es el tamaño de la casa, pero cuando llueva, este corte de aquí se puede derrumbar sobre esa misma casa.
So another important thing to look at here is the scale. Here we see maybe it's just the scale of one house, and maybe they just made a small cut. But when you have an extreme event of rain, then this slope, because it's changed from the natural slope, has become at risk, and you can have a landslide, which would then affect this house.
Terminando el antropoceno, decimos que ya no existe, pero independiente de aquello han habido cambios y cambios ambientales que nosotros debemos reconocer. Y yo solamente voy a dejar esta última lámina para que analicemos esta condición de lo que... Esto es un típico teoría de sistema. ¿Ya?
Okay. So, first she was mentioning about how the Anthropocene is just generally not recognized sufficiently in science, and that now she'll leave this graph to discuss a bit about...
Sí. By me, the Anthropocene exists, does exist, because we have the evidence. We found the evidence in the basin. Pero aquí lo importante es tener en cuenta esta relación de escala. Entonces, nosotros cuando estamos analizando el terreno en el cambio climático y los impactos en el territorio, en la sociedad, ¿dónde estamos? Espacial y temporalmente, ¿aquí? Aquí, no, estamos aquí.
Okay. So she's talking about, when we're talking about changes at a larger time scale and saying, okay, this era is this era is Anthropocene, that we actually aren't living at this huge, long time scale, but we're living at a much smaller and smaller time scale.
Entonces, ustedes que van a estar trabajando, tomando decisiones sobre el territorio, tienen que saber lo que pasó en estas dimensiones temporales y espaciales, pero el impacto en mi comunidad es aquí, en este tiempo y en este espacio.
So as people that are maybe making decisions in the territory or even working on the geomorphology, we need to understand this long time scale of what happened in the past. However, when we are working more operationally and thinking about what communities are impacted by something, then we need to move into the more short time scale, present day.
En términos de investigación y de gobernanza de los territorios, eso es un enorme desafío porque es un gran trabajo y requiere muchos recursos.
So in terms of governance, this is a huge amount of work. It requires a lot of resources.
Y finalmente, para que ustedes me crean que esto es así, aquí hay algunas evidencias. Esto es en el río Mapocho, 40 y tantos kilómetros aguas abajo de acá, inundaciones del 2024. Y aquí tenemos el nivel de inundación fluvial del 24, otro nivel de inundación fluvial y otro nivel de inundación fluvial.
So here in this image, you can see different terraces that have formed from different events of water level. So flooding in 2024, another water level making a small terrace here, and even this very small water level forming a tiny terrace here in the riverbed.
Pero estas terrazas debieran teóricamente ser destruidas e inundadas en la siguiente crecida.
So in theory, each of these terraces in the next flooding event should be again destroyed, distributed, and
Ya, entonces esas pequeñas formas son las que nosotros debemos ahora reconocer, identificar, caracterizar y mapear.
so these small forms in the rivers are what we need to recognize,
Caracterizar,
characterize, and
mapping.
map, so that we can then use that to make decisions.
Gracias.
Anyone have any questions? ¿Hay preguntas?
So the spatial scales, as you suggested, can go from these micro scales all the way to larger resolutions. The temporal scales are climate scales, you talk about Anthropocene. How much of that mapping is even feasible? What would you do? Would you go to paleoclimate? Would you go to remote sensing? So it's a fascinating field, but also very difficult, I'm assuming.
Ay, sí.
Dice que,
No, sí lo entendí. Sí, no sé, I don't know. La verdad es que debiéramos pensar en que, primero que nada, pensar las características locales insertos en una cuenca, ¿ya? En su condición climática general, ver lo que ha pasado durante los últimos... para mí, un umbral importante fue el primer niño, el 82, aquí. Y ahí tenemos una escala de tiempo con datos que podríamos analizar. Luego viene la megasequía, el 2010, en Chile Central. Y bueno, y ahora están los pulsos climáticos, variabilidad climática, y la verdad es que es muy difícil poder hacer un diseño probabilístico, ¿ya? Eso por un lado.
So it's a difficult question to answer, but she thinks that looking at the information in a catchment, going back maybe to 1982 when there was this big El Niño flood event, and looking at conditions before 2010 and how the drought has affected things since 2010.
Y lo otro es que el periodo de datos climáticos es tan corto para estos procesos que es difícil, creo, poder estimar, ¿no es cierto?, modelos. Hay modelos, pero son modelos con un nivel de certeza, con un nivel de certeza en donde la incerteza es el fenómeno más importante.
Yep. First, you said it's difficult also to make a probabilistic design because of this uncertainty, because of climate variability, and that projecting into the future, this uncertainty and variability is becoming more and more important.
Sí. Y en relación a las metodologías, obviamente, el remote sensing, drones, y todas esas herramientas ahora ayudan un montón. ¿Para qué? Para hacer mapas a escala de muy pequeño detalle. ¿Por qué? Porque son ahí donde ocurren, a nivel a veces de 100 metros, donde ocurre una ruptura de equilibrio que va a generar la inundación de una ciudad.
So this is where we can use different methods to detect what's happening on the ground, like drones, satellite imagery, and it's important to have it at a very detailed scale, especially to capture things like these terraces, because something that could happen maybe even at a scale of 10 meters could cause something changing an equilibrium point. Maybe one of these terraces eroding could then lead to the flooding of an entire city.
Hola, buenos días, gracias por la presentación. Pienso que una de las cosas muy importantes es el tema de la escala, ¿cierto? Y el tiempo. Y también nombraste de recursos, de necesidad de recursos para ello. ¿Es entonces una manera cierta, piensas, que haya como una frecuencia mucho mayor de la toma de datos en lo local desde lo humano para poder tener mayor certeza en el mapeo de estas cosas? Me refiero a que hablamos de escala, ¿cierto?
Sí.
De distintos tiempos. Pero si llegamos a lo local, para poder tener mayor certeza, debiéramos tener muchos datos tomados con mayor frecuencia, ¿o no?
Sí.
¿A eso
Sí.
un poco te refieres y también al tema del recurso?
Sí, la verdad es que si tú entras a analizar... Ah, perdón. Ya no sé la pregunta.
So the question is whether, if we're looking at this, that she's mentioned that there is need for this very precise data, if that data should then also be at a very much higher timescale and collected locally.
Sí, y la respuesta es efectivamente no tenemos puntos, una gran nube de puntos de toma de datos de caudal ni de precipitaciones. ¿Ya? Eso primero.
So first thing is that we actually don't have such a complete, like a cloud of measurements of precipitation or river discharge.
Entonces, ¿cuál es el desafío? ¿Por qué? Porque existen mapas en el Ministerio de Obras Públicas, en el MIMBU, pero que son de los ríos y de las ciudades de hace 10 años, 20 años, que no están en relación con lo que está ocurriendo ahora. Entonces, y a eso le agregamos los asentamientos informales, ¿ya?
So this, in combination with the fact that the maps that we have of cities, especially the ones the government uses, might be somewhat outdated. Maybe they're from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They might not include the detail in the geomorphology, but also not the detail in where certain populations live, especially the informal settlements.
Entonces, el problema es ese, que tenemos que ir metro a metro, escala, viendo cada una de las formas en nuestras áreas que nos interesa, obviamente las áreas pobladas, ¿no es cierto?, ya sean formales o informales, para identificar qué es lo que va a pasar.
So we need to go at a very local scale, maybe even meter by meter, in the areas that are of interest to us, which are in this case the inhabited areas, both formal and informal settlements, to understand what can happen.
Y un ejemplo, en un asentamiento informal en el río Mapocho, si este año hay río atmosférico, un asentamiento informal en el lecho del río no se va a inundar, se va a erosionar, ¿ya? Porque lo hemos visto cómo ha ido retrocediendo. Entonces son metros. Eso significa enormes recursos para poder investigar, identificar y mapear.
So, for example, there's an informal settlement in the riverbed of the Mapocho River. The Mapocho River is also here near Santiago. And in this case, because they've studied it in more detail, they can say that the informal sediment in the riverbed, it won't flood with the next event, but the terrace that it's on will probably erode, because they've been studying how this terrace has been slowly eroding a bit at a time. However, this requires a lot of resources to study and to have such a level of detail where you can even predict something like this.
No sé si te respondí. Okay.
Francisco?
So just before thank you for the amazing presentation, by the way. Just before this, we had also a representative of the governance of Chile here, and there is indeed friction between the areas of research and trying to validate points and effectively applying that into governance. You mentioned at least a bit of that, but there was this impression to myself. With that being said, what do you think can be done to effectively put some of these findings into effective governance for the future of Chile, and also for lessons to be learned then throughout the world from this?
You can translate to Spanish.
No, no. Sí, sí. La verdad es que nosotros como chilenos no somos buenos para aprender lecciones, ¿ya? Tenemos, por ejemplo, yo creo que esa fue la pregunta, ¿no es cierto? Sí. Tú me hablaste de la gobernanza y las lecciones aprendidas.
Que puede haber una fricción entre la gobernanza.
Ah, perdón.
Yo estaba preguntando, es que la presentación que estuvimos acá, estaba con una representante de la gobernanza de Chile. En su presentación la profesora estaba hablando como de algunas fricciones que se hay entre el ambiente académico para probar puntos y la posibilidad de realmente aplicarlas en el ambiente de gobernanza, de tomar de decisión política. Yo estaba preguntando cómo se puede alcanzar esta sinergia entre las áreas, si es posible, para el contexto de Chile naturalmente, pero también para que podamos aprender lecciones en otros contextos en el mundo en desarrollo, como en Brasil, por ejemplo, pero también en Estados Unidos, como los estudiantes están acá a encontrar soluciones también. Esa es la pregunta.
Sí, la verdad es que nuevamente tengo que decir, I don't know. Es muy complicado. Como decía, en Chile en general no somos buenos para aprender las lecciones. Tenemos, por ejemplo, el terremoto y el tsunami del 2010. Destruyó las ciudades costeras y se reconstruyó en el mismo lugar, ¿ya? ¿Por qué? Porque el instrumento de planificación, y aquí es sumamente importante entender el modelo político-económico en que nosotros vivimos, ¿ya? Con este modelo heredado de tiempos, ¿no es cierto?, de otros tiempos, y que no pudimos cambiarlo, es muy difícil hacer cambios. Sorry. No es geomorfología, es...
So her answer to the question was that, well, in reality, Chile is not unfortunately a good example for learning these lessons. And she gave the example of the earthquakes on 2010 that destroyed sort of the central south area of Chile, the city of Concepcion, several coastal cities with the tsunami also associated with it. And then in reality, she doesn't know. This is a very good question because with this current social, political sort of system conditions that we have here, that is somewhat hereditary, sort of relinquished from days gone by, where perhaps there was another type of centralization of power, if you guys understand the reference here. It's very difficult to have this sort of long-term predictions and decision making. So that was her comment.
Y es muy bueno recordar la frase que colocó Daniela. En lo privado, uno puede hacer todo lo que no está prohibido. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Con los instrumentos de planificación están determinados los usos y la propiedad privada. Y con la propiedad privada tú no puedes hacer nada, ¿ya? Eso es una realidad de nuestro modelo.
of the quote that
Qué
Daniela
terrible.
in his presentation was mentioning that the state sort of cannot really intervene on the private property, sorry, and to the limits of the law, basically everything can be done in there, and then the state sort of just regulates it a bit, and then effectively this really hampers this kind of adaptation. And yes, this is the current limitation of the current system that we have. And then maybe, as my comment, it's up to us also to think about these things and how we can develop it in the future.
Entonces, es muy difícil llegar con estos planteamientos a un gobierno local, a una municipalidad o a la autoridad. Daniela es mi colega, lo entiende. ¿Ya? La ministra de Medio Ambiente es académica, lo entiende, pero tampoco pueden hacer mucho. ¿Por qué? Porque el modelo no nos deja hacer.
Even if, for example, Daniela, that was just here, is an academic, understands this issue, that there is a need to sort of have a better, sort of more integrated governance for this, it's still fragmented her position in a way where not much will be done, and there potentially is subintended here. Lots of voices will be against it or say it's not necessary. So this is again a flaw of the current system and in the instruments that we have to govern it.
Y podríamos concluir entonces que hay resiliencia, hay cambio climático, sí lo hay, la resiliencia es poca, pero nosotros podríamos decir que hasta el modelo nos está llevando a generar riesgo, inundación, poca resiliencia. ¿Ya? La academia me permite hacer esa aseveración y me hago cargo.
Muchas gracias. So what you were saying that yes, you know, in the day and age we live in, there is sort of climate change, lack of resilience, but at the end of the day, the model itself, the model of governance, is a very, very sort of stressing factor in our lack of resilience, bigger risks, allowance of vulnerability. So this of course compounds, but it is ultimately one of the big key factors, and perhaps here subintended, a bit disregarded. And she of course validates her position based on her sort of academic research.
Gracias.
Sí. Problema.
Any other questions? ¿Las preguntas?
¿Preguntas?
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Entonces creo que ahora tenemos una pausa para el café, que es afuera. We'll now have a small coffee break, so it's just outside the auditorium in the, next to the building. So you can go there. And we'll continue after, después del coffee break, vamos a tener una pequeña discusión. Vamos a tener la presentación del profesor José Araos y después la discusión, perdón. Sí, como cambiamos un poco el programa. Okay.
Muchas gracias por la traducción.
Gracias, perdón, que un poco difícil.
It's okay. Did you see this? I also sent a picture of it. I mean, it's just like on the topic.
I'm gonna just edit some.
If the writing of the topic, the title for it is not good, then. I put a little map of Chile.
You hear my bad English. What do you think?
Can you hear my bad translation?
No, it's what are you? You think maybe in English? It's a big presentation, 20 minutes.
Yeah, you can. Vamos a para la discusión con una diapositiva también para Ok, ok. ¿Va transmitiendo en vivo?
Sí,
¿Será que me puede mandar el...? Es que alguien de nuestro grupo...
ya, sí, mira, en YouTube, en Mundo Pau. En estos momentos está.
All right, welcome back everybody. Lo que se va acomodando. Okay. All right, vamos a retomar el evento. Ahora tenemos la presentación del doctor José Araos Espinoza, que es de aquí mismo de del Departamento de Geografía. Bueno. Y después de su presentación vamos a tener un ratito para preguntas y luego tener una discusión en grupos y lo voy a explicar luego de la presentación.
Okay, good morning to everyone. Please accept my apologies in advance for my bad English. I try to see the specific in some items that we are talking about now. We are seeing these days, but you don't know who I am. Maybe I am José Araos. I am academic of the Department of Geography here in the Universidad de Chile. And also, I am the coordinator of the Master in Geography here in the University of Chile. I am also a geomorphologist, but I am working now, or my focus is on glacial geomorphology. So in the next slides, I'll try to speak about glaciers as a time machine. Did you see Back to the Future? Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk about later. And I was thinking about, I really like to think in glaciers like a time machine because they are very sensitive elements from nature and in front of changes in temperature and precipitations, but also that occurs now, but also occurs in the past. So we will talk about very specific concepts about that, and I'll try to give you some information, very brief, about past relation about climate and glaciers and what is happening now. I based this little presentation, this quick presentation, just 4 hours and a half. You drink coffee, okay? No. It's, in maybe 4 or 5 research papers. That research papers, Linea have those papers. So if you want to read, if you want to talk about that, maybe we can talk about this later or maybe in the near future. Recent trends in variability in climate and glaciers in the Andes. What are the lessons learned? I don't refer to a specific studies. I prefer to refer to the Andes in general, and then we can discuss about very specific studies. A couple of definitions that will be useful for understand what we talk later. What is a glacier, and why should we care about glacier? The definition is, I'm going to read this. A glacier is an accumulation of ice and snow that slowly flows over land and higher elevations. More snow typically falls than melts, adding to this mass. That is a picture of the glaciar del Cerro El Plomo. You saw this glacier this week. Have you seen this? No? Well, maybe later we can make the exercise to see the glacier of Cerro El Plomo. One.
I've seen this, by the way. I think Gerald was mentioning this at some point on your way back.
Yeah. Really. So the most important thing that I tried to give to you in this little presentation is glaciers depends on climate. If you have conditions of lower temperatures, high precipitations, snow precipitations, you have an LT glacier. You know, a glacier who is growing, who is faster moving, who is changing the landscape. But if you have an increase in the temperatures, if you have a decrease in the precipitation, or maybe they change from snow to rain, you have a thick glacier. maybe a poor glacier will have a little mass, with shrinking, with reducing this area. And that's the main concept that I want to try to give to you these minutes, this couple of minutes. Glaciers are very sensitive to climate changes, and they respond very, very fast. So if you have the temperature, alpha degree, if you lower the precipitations in a catchment, María Victoria was talking about catchment a few moments ago, you can have some changes in the glacier. Unfortunately, these days, glaciers are really sick. They are retreating, they are reducing because we have experimented this climate change. This is one of the papers that you can review later, Dassalant and et al. It's very recent. 2 decades of glacier mass loss along the Andes. This is a paper published in Nature Geoscience, which is a very, very nice research review. And what I want to try to say in this slide, should we care about glaciers? Yeah. Should we care about the changes that are experimenting glaciers? Yeah. Because Andes is the vertebral spine of South America, and we have a lot of Andean countries which depends of what happened in the Andes or what happened in the glaciers in the Andes. So the sad reality is that glaciers are shrinking, reducing, and obviously they have this behavior have an impact over natural resources, mainly water. So there is 4 points that is important to take in mind because we maybe talk about this later. If glaciers are changing, we have a reduced water availability. So we have less water and maybe changes in quality. Also, we have altered river flow regimes, so maybe we can expect some changes or maybe some abrupt changes in the regime of the rivers. Another point of interest, there's an increased risk of natural hazards. We talked very briefly last days about GLOF. Do you remember that? GLOF are a reality, and there is a certain preoccupation in the last IPCC report. They say that GLOF, there are a very important thing to have in count in this context of glacier retreating. And obviously, we have an impact on water quality. So, if you can see, water is a very important element or changes in water quality and quantity, that's it, are key factors in the actual situation of glaciers. But I want to, I'm sorry, there is another slide with the same figure of this article of this Dassalant. And there is some numbers or data that is important to take also in mind. The total mass change over this period, we are talking about the Andes, is 22.9 gigatons per year. Just to have an idea of what is 22.9 gigatons, is equal to 39 millions of Airbus 300 aircraft. You know the Airbus is the much bigger airplane in the planet now, a passenger airplane. So the total mass changed in the Andes is equivalent to 39 million of billions of these Airbus, so these aircraft. So just to have an idea. In Patagonian Andes, there is also changes, important changes in the mass area and the water equivalent per year. Tropical Andes also, in the dry Andes also, the same situation. Important thing to take into account is Well, we are talking in Patagonia. Okay, maybe Patagonia had certainly a super habit of water, you know? Maybe. The problem is in the semi-arid and arid regions, because these Andean countries depends of the water who comes from the Andes and from the glaciers. And if the glaciers are losing mass, there is less water. So it's very important to take in account. But as I said, I am a geomorphologist, a glacier geomorphologist, and I'm trying to be a paleoscientist. So I try to say to you in the next 2 slides very short information about the recent history of the glaciers here in the Andean range. That image comes from Pat Ice, and there is the link if you want to see later, which is a simulation of the glacier changes over the Pleistocene, Holocene geologic time, which in geology is very close, you know, it's like something like that. Pleistocene, Holocene is very, very recent. And there are very important things that we want to know about this. Maybe the more important I don't want to say date or geological time. I say about birthday. You know, birthday, the most important birthday for glaciers in the recent past is the last glacial maximum. At that time, we have a Pleistocene Patagonian ice field, which was very, very big, you know, and maybe we have a landscape quite different from now. Glaciers are changing, and you see in this image and in this text. But these changes that you are seeing now are natural changes. They are related to Milankovitch cycles. They are related to astronomical variation of the Earth. They are not related to the society in the Earth. That is important to know. You were in the Cajón del Maipo. That's right? So this is maybe a little bit complicated graph, but it is also talking about the history, glacial recent history in the central Andes. So also we have periods with a lot of glaciers in the Andes, and they are shrinking. Again, they are shrinking, but in fact, related, to natural conditions or natural forcings. There are no humans in this process. This is a spoiler alert because you will be in Punta Arenas next week. That is another paper from Garcia et al., which is a geomorphological mapping of Torres del Paine National Park. And you will see that lines with the red or orange colors, that are moraines. And moraines are the geomorphological evidence of the past extension of the glaciers. So maybe you will be in a place like this, seeing the Torres del Paine, and you will be in a place that will be recently deglaciated. So you will be in this time machine, because maybe you will walk in the moraines that are related to the recent variation of these glaciers. In fact, you will be maybe in Punta Arenas main square. Maybe this is a question for the guys who are working with you in Punta Arenas. There are some ideas about the past extension of the glaciers in this place. And maybe if you made the exercise to put in the square of Punta Arenas and you look above your head, maybe you, in the past, maybe you will cover it by a couple of hundreds of meters of ice. So please ask to people from Punta Arenas. They have the exact, maybe not the exact, maybe a more exact number about this deep of the glacier in which is Punta Arenas now. So that's the recent geological and glaciological history. And again, these facts are related to natural variation of the climate and the glaciers. No humans involved in that. But I chose this number of nature, from a couple of years ago, which talk about the human epoch of the Anthropocene, which is a geological era. There is a lot of discussion about that, but some people say that this is a new geological era, which is basically dominated by the presence of the society in the earth. And one of the effects of this presence is the changes, or very altered changes in the temperature. So in this graph, you can see, obviously the black line is showing the temperature, average temperature on Earth, and what happened in the recent years. This is also known as the hockey stick, the man's hockey stick, or in Chile we say la chueca de man. And this is the irrefutable evidence of the impact on society over nature. And obviously, as I said a couple of minutes ago, glaciers are very sensitive to these environmental changes. So next slides, we will see some examples extracted from recent investigation of what are these impacts. This is taken from the Atlas of the Andes and Water, and you can see here a simulation about the changes in the temperature and precipitations. Maybe you are talking this week about simulation or modelation on climate, but this is basically estimation of how temperatures and precipitations will change in the very near future. Obviously, if you see the right figure, that is temperature, and colors red and orange indicates a rise in the temperature, which is obviously located near the Andes or in the actual Andes. So it's a little kind of worried. There is a very, I don't know, for me it's shocking to see these simulations, because we are talking about a very proximal changes, and they will have certainly a great impact over the glaciers. Obviously, we can see also the precipitations, simulation, and this is the opposite of temperatures. Precipitations are reducing in the next couple of years. So, examples. This is a paper from this year from Caro et al. Caro, by the way, is a geographer from here, from Geography Department of Universidad de Chile. And there are some specific topics about this paper. I don't want to read this, but I'll say some things that are important. They're very important. Warning temperatures and varied precipitations. We saw that in the last slide. Dramatic decline in the glacier runoff. This is another very important thing to take in account. Peak waters. Maybe we will experiment some changes or drastic changes in the rivers' behaviors. So we have very crecida, I don't know the name. Crecida del río? Flooding. We will have very big floodings, but also we have moments with no water in the river, So María Victoria told about that in the last lecture, We will be experimenting a situation where rivers are changing his behavior. So that is important to take in mind, because we live in the Andean countries. And obviously, all the forecast says that we have less water than now. Another example, this is from Caro. Again, there is two research papers these last years. And again, we have the water ability at risk, shifting glacier runoff, with widespread glacier reduction. There are some regional hotspots, which is very important to take in account, because one of the problems that we have here in southern hemisphere is we have a lot of gap of data. I forgot to put that slide in this presentation, but if you compare the paleo investigation in northern and southern hemisphere, if you put them up, northern hemisphere, there is a lot of investigation. Because there are more researchers, because there are more funds, because logistics are more developed. But in southern hemisphere, there is a problem. We have a lot of gap of data. There are regions where we know nothing. So it's very important to start to take the data. It's important to relevate, to map, to characterize this behavior in this region. We don't know everything yet. Sounds weird, but that is our reality by the moment. Another example, Ochoa et al., a very recent paper also. And look at this, again, the same terms, rapid glaciers melt and snow decline, altered water availability, ecosystem disruption. This paper is a little bit widespread, they're talking about ecosystem. Threats on food security. That is a very, very important issue. Increase of natural hazards. So, scenario is complicated in the near future. I think this is the last example. Yeah, Aljari et al., a very recent paper also. And they're talking about the growing of the aridity in the Andean region. Snow also have a critical role in trying to understand how the glaciers what will be behavior in the future. Reducing snowfall and glacier loss drive and dryness, impact on water availability for people and ecosystem. So at the end of this presentation, I made a little exercise about a word cloud with the most important terms on these papers. So, based on the scientific research made in the Andes the last couple of years, which we hope they are representing also the concerns about the people who live in these Andean countries, we have some lessons learned. Deepening understanding on system interactions. Daniela talks a little about this in the first presentation. Strengthening monitoring and research. We talk about this one of these days. Inform and create policies for local and regional adaptations. In fact, now in Chile, we are currently under the climate change institutionality, and we have a ley for the adaptación al cambio climático. That is a great effort to support this kind of activities. Promote transdisciplinary collaboration. We have a lot to do in this issue because we are working in our specific fields, but sometimes we forgot to talk with our colleagues of geoscience or human researchers that they are give to us a very nice information. Enhance predictive models and methodologies. That is a very important issue also. There is another lesson that we are currently learning, and we need to take actions in this way in the near future. integrate diverse knowledge, advances in climate justice. Again, Daniela talked a little bit about that in his presentation. Prioritize vulnerable regions, improve data and local calibration of this data, improve management strategies, investigate regional and local difference, research about the water availability, enhance the localization, the localized impact, and this understanding. We are, I think, in the correct path for try to cover these issues, but obviously we are learning in the process, so maybe we made some mistakes, but we are currently trying to understand or trying to think more clearly about these things. I took these research papers and I made a very quick exercise of a word of clothes, and these are the challenges or some of them. I hope that this slide we can help in the next discussion. Water ability, impact of water reduction, catchment is a very important natural zone, or zone maybe is a correct term. We can study, so we can make some monitoring exercise. And there is a lot of words that maybe you can discuss later. What direction should we take? Obviously, improve the research in climate, improve the adaptation policies, try to understand much better how the current climate change is impact the Andes and the glaciers in the Andes, collaboration, policymakers, transdisciplinary. That are the key elements that we have, that should have to have in our minds to advance in this kind of research. And finally, I took a little quote of this amazing writer, Isaac Asimov. The sad aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gains wisdom. That is very important, because you people, I need to say now, I'm sorry, because we made a lot of impact in this nature system, but you have the obligation, I'm sorry, of be active, speak clearly and loudly, speak with decision makers. The climate crisis is growing deeper. Para quienes están acá en español, sean activos, hablen claramente, hablen fuerte, hablen con los tomadores de decisiones, porque la crisis climática cada día va a ser peor. And that's it. Muchas gracias. And now? Oh, sorry. Some questions? They don't understand nothing.
Over the next 25 to 50 years, let's say, around middle of the century and a bit beyond, what are the most immediate impacts you see on, let's say, Santiago, on agriculture? You spoke a little bit, but in general on Chile, because of what will happen to the glaciers?
That's an excellent question, because we are talking about agricultural activities.
Agricultural or urban?
But I refer to agricultural in first instance, because when we talk about the water use, maybe the first thing that we keep in mind is mining. Mining took a lot of water. But in Chile, and I don't know if it's the same in other countries, agricultural activities, they took a lot of water, and they don't. There is a lot of waste of water, you know. So we have this new scenario with glaciers that are retreating with less water disposable for agricultural use. And then you have agricultural practice that they are no under new technologies or under new methodologies of production. So maybe agriculture will be very impacted about this less water availability. And the other thing is the quality of the water, you know, because eventually we have a change in the mass balance of the rivers. So we have water with more sediments. So that affects all the production chains in agriculture. I have a couple of years in the Andes trying to do some investigation. So I saw, and I am not, I'll be honest, I saw dramatic changes in some glaciers because we are working currently in a glacier which is Juncal Norte, which is very close to Santiago. First time that we went to Glaciar Juncal Norte, I arrived to the end of the path, and then I climbed to the glacier. Now there is a big lagoon in front of the glacier. Some of students of here we were in the Juncal last couple of weeks. And we have a big lagoon, and you can't go by walk to the glacier. You need to make a roundabout to arrive to the glacier. That is a dramatic change in the last 20 or 30 years. And the main problem here in Santiago is we depend of the glaciers from the water, you know. So we are experimenting changes that are new, because in the winter, mainly when we have these events of atmospheric rivers, also rivers increase, they erode the catchment, and of the water supplies of Santiago are blocked because this amount of sediments. That is very new. That is from maybe last 10 years. That is one of the examples of glacier variation, and rapid climate changes are affecting the people from Santiago. I'm sorry for the central idea, you know. But also, again, you will be in Punta Arenas next week. I lived in Punta Arenas for years. The Rio de las Minas also had a very important flooding a couple of years ago, related also these very quick events of higher precipitation. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, I asked.
I was wondering, you mentioned the other day about the glacial lake outflows floods, and I was wondering what geographical areas those are more, like there's a greater risk for that, or if there's some specific ones you're monitoring.
I think there is a migration in the risk of GLOF, because they started in Peru, and in Peru there are some tragic examples of GLOF. We affect the people and the infrastructure. And maybe 20 years from now, we don't know about this GLOF in Central Andes and Southern Andes. But recently we are worried about that, because Central Andes and Southern Andes, they are experimenting very dramatic changes in glacier retreat. And they are creating these proglaciers, lagoons. So think that moraines, they are not, they are very unstable in geological terms. And also in the southern Chile, we have a lot of faults. The Liquiñe-Ofqui faults, seismically, is very active. So there is a problem, because we have these new lagoons. They have a large amount of water, but they are now under erosion. Maybe they will be affected by seismic activity. So the probability of a GLOF in these areas is very high. We have some documentation about glove in Aysén region, but in places that is nobody lives. You know, very big catchment in the Aysén River where there are some farmers and nothing more. They suffer some glove. But the only thing that we know that the only evidence of that glove is a peak in the monitoring. There is no people seeing that. The problem is when this glove maybe can occur close to the town or population. I talked to you last days about this experiment that we are making in Aysén, in the Parque Nacional Cerro Castillo, and we are worried about that. We need to start to monitoring this glove. We need to start to mapping this glove to have an idea of where these lagoons are appearing and its behavior, and try to make an approximation, you know, where are the more risky places.
You mentioned earlier about how there's like a lack of research in the south, in the southern hemisphere. And I was just curious, I mean, like with the knowledge that you have, like what makes the glaciers in the southern hemisphere or research in this area differ from the ones like in the northern hemisphere, like for instance in like Iceland, or like just, you know, the other ones that are up north? Is there like a geological difference, like maybe like limit of the different types of rocks? I was just curious about
Yeah, for people who works in paleoscience, there are a couple of questions that are very, very present now. If we talk about if the past changes in glaciers occur at the same time in northern and southern hemisphere, or first in the southern hemisphere, and next in the northern hemisphere. That question are very, very important now for people who works in paleo climate, you know. There are some similarities if you think in the tectonic configuration of the Andes in northern hemisphere. Mountain changes are lower, but the genesis is the same process. But we have this amazing condition that Chile probably is one of the narrow the countries in the world, you know. They make that significant to us a lot of singularities about climate, about the latitudinal distribution of precipitation, of temperatures. In northern hemisphere, we have a huge amount of continent, you know, so climate processes are modulated by the condition of the continentality. But we have a thing in common, that is the gradient of temperatures. You know, if you are higher, temperatures are lower. So eventually, glaciers have similar behaviors. That is the reason, because it's important to compare. You know, I think there is a lot of work to do in that comparison. Also, there is another thing here in Chile. Logistics are complicated. If you want to study southern Patagonian ice field, for example, you need to move people, equipment, and you need a logistic very, very specific and quite complicated sometimes. We work a lot of years in southern Patagonian ice field doing some glaciological research, and we need helicopters to go to that places, and they have a very, very higher cost. They are very complicated to work with that kind of logistic. So I think that is one of the reasons that we have this lack of data. You know, remote sensing is now helping in that. We covered it. It's like a joke, you know, but with a colleague from Universidad Católica, we are sitting in front of our computers with Google Earth and say, okay, I do some field work, you know, trying to search these places that are amazing for investigation. But you identify, you got one spot, and then you start to evaluate. We can arrive to this place. There are there are logistic support. So in some places it's really, really complicated. You have, for example, in the US, the NCF, from the NSF. Oh, yeah. Well, that's another topic of interest discussion. Sorry about the question. Here in Chile also we have some funds, but they are for a short time, 3 years, 4 years, and the months maybe. You are working by jumping. You know, you start with a little fund, you take some area, you finish your project, and then you start to apply for another fund to start to continuously work in this area. So continuity from time to time is very complicated to progress the investigation.
Building on that, could you make an argument that the southern hemisphere glaciers are perhaps more vulnerable than their northern counterparts due to, for instance, their diminished size in comparison, say, for instance, to Greenland or Iceland? I think, maybe I'm mistaken, but I think the only southern hemisphere glaciers apart from Antarctica are in the Andes, maybe New Zealand, and I don't think South Africa has them in like Lesotho.
Yeah. I think all the glaciers around the world are in problems. They are all sick, you know. There are very, very little exceptions. Maybe in southern Patagonia, I feel there are 2 glaciers that are growing now, but because they are very, very big. The problem here in the Andes is we live close to the Andes, you know. We put some very big cities, Arica, Antofagasta, Santiago, Concepción, Punta Arenas, very close to the mountain. So we depend strictly from what happens in the Andes for water, climate, resources, and we are talking not only water, we are talking about mining or another kind of production. So the vulnerability of these glaciers in the Andean range, is maybe related to our presence here, you know. I don't know how to solve that because we are in these places, the cities are consolidated, but there are some new policies about the use of the water in the future. We have also a new law, what is the natural risk law, that they are trying to give some lineaments from the use of the territory. But we are starting on that.
And then, of course, you know, as anything related to this science as we see now, it is indeed very much so reactive to the current conditions and the further deterioration of them. Is there, in your opinion and research, perhaps any sort of proactive measure besides trying to protect the glaciers that are already sick? Is there any sort of process or any idea being researched that could perhaps sort of attempt to grow them or protect them from diminishing in a more accelerated way? Or not really?
Yeah, I remember some situation about this topic, the growing glaciers. You know, there is in the glaciological community. There is a glaciologist in the room because I talk about sensible items. There is in all the congress related to glaciology in Chile, there is always a dispute about there are growing glaciers we can protect or we can make that they grow again. And some people say we can move ice with machinery and put it in another place and maybe we have a new glacier. That is, I'm sorry, I can't say the word, but that is a fake. That is not really, that will not happen. Glaciers are very, very sick, you know, and it's quite difficult to create a new glacier. Yesterday we talked about these things, the water, that pyramid of waters. I don't remember the name now. That in the winter you have some water just is to wait to that they convert in ice, and then you use that water from agricultural use in the summer. But they are very located. They are associated a very little catchment, and it works very good. But I think the current situation is we are losing our glaciers. There are no technologies at the moment to try to regrout glaciers, maybe to protect. There are some examples in the Alps. In the ski, certain sectors will put some kind of material in the summer to avoid the insulation, reduce the glacier. But again, there are very local efforts. Yeah, I am pessimistic about this. We try now to give some ideas to the people about what is a glacier. Because we live close to the Andes, but a lot of people don't know what is the Andes or what are the glaciers that are located now in the Andes. So the efforts to educate the population about these Andean countries, about the vulnerability of these Andean countries, the situation of the glaciers is a key question. Mm-hmm.
Es una pregunta que, claro, tengo como un poco de investigación también, cómo hacer como esta relación entre el social y entre el natural o el físico o el humano dentro de la geografía o como del espacio y sobre todo también como el espacio y la sociedad, como esta relación no tan como distinta, como algo un poco más concreto, sobre todo en nuestra realidad de sur global.
Mm-hmm. You want to translate the question?
So basically his question was here in the realities of the global south. How can we, if I got it correctly, how can we sort of, what kind of impact as society, as individuals, as a city can we really actually have in these processes? Given all the context that we have here, how can we perhaps have a society that is more sort of working together with the local climate nuances and characteristics instead of something that is confrontational, just... ¿Está bien? Yeah, that was the question.
I think we have a problem of communication in first place, because the scientific community is working in its sphere, I don't know how to say that. We are working very close with the scientific people, for the scientific people. What we forgot, you are, tú estás de acuerdo, but we forgot, or we have this problem about how communicate the scientific results to the people. Because we are worried of write our papers or make our lectures in the scientific congress, but we forgot how to communicate in an easy way to the people what are our findings, what are their significance, or what are the apports to the... I always have this problem with the ordenamiento territorial in English. Urban planning, the land planning, land planning. I think we had a lot of opportunities to do that, but we have a problem with our language. We are used to talk in scientific code for our community, but we are forget about the society. That's my personal opinion about that. I think that is a big problem. And if we can solve that, maybe we can do a big apport to the land management, to say to the people, look, you are living in a country, in an Andean country, you are close to these risks, but don't be alarmist, you know, you need to be used to the volcanic eruptions, you need to be used to the meteorological variations, because it's part of the nature, it's because of the place that you are living. But we are not doing that very well. My personal opinion. There are some good examples of people that are doing this very good, but we need to improve that. There is a lot of another issues in that question, but maybe we can discuss later in the afternoon or now, I don't know.
Well, my question might be a little bit out of the specific scope of this, but I'm really interested because I think it's something that comes along with a lot of the science disciplines. So the last couple of days or weeks, there has been a news that Antarctic ice has been growing. I'm not sure if this is real or not. It's not specifically my area, and I haven't had a lot of time to research about it. But assuming it's true, my mom asked me, hey, how does this relate to climate change? And many places, many people have taken advantage of this news to say that climate change is not true.
Mm-hmm.
So how can one communicate, or how does one address the subject of variability in this case, a growing ice sheet, and the difference, but this kind of variability with climate change, and how can we communicate it to people who aren't specifically in science or strictly against it?
Mm-hmm. I never heard about that of these days, so I suppose some things. You mean that there are some glaciers in Antarctica, maybe Antarctic Peninsula, that are growing now?
Yeah, I haven't seen much about it, but that was the title of the
Yeah.
news, at least.
Yeah. Well, we need to do more research about, but maybe it's not a good news. Maybe it's a bad news, because in Antarctic Peninsula, glaciers are flowing from the interior of the continent to the outside, you know, and they are ice platforms, you know, works like a stop signal, you know, because they maintain the flux of the glacier stable. But if the ice platforms start to disappear, the flow of the glaciers are faster, so they are moving from the interior of the Antarctic to the outside. So they are growing, yeah, but they are apporting cold water and agua dulce, sweet water to the Antarctic Ocean. And you know, fresh water, I'm sorry. So you know, Antarctic Ocean is also known as the climate factory of the world, you know. If they are changing the temperature and salinity of these circumpolar currents, the impacts are in all the planet, you know. So I don't know, maybe there are, if you read the news and say, oh, glaciers are growing, amazing, but they are in the Antarctic Peninsula, okay, they are no good news. Again, I don't know all the details of what you are talking, but in the other side of that question, again, the same. We need to start to learn to communicate in effective way what is a glacier, what means variation of a glacier. I remember, I think I also lived in La Serena a couple of years in North Chile, and sometimes we are talking about very related things to a group of decision makers in Serena City. And one guy, I don't remember, maybe a concejal, says, I don't understand a thing about you are saying about the glacier lost. What if you compare the area lost with a football cancha, no, the field? Something like that are very, very useful. You know, you could say, we are losing 28 gigatons per year in a glacier. But if you say gigatons are equal to, okay, I start to worry, or I start to read more about this. You know, I think we need to improve our communications skills of science. I think that is a very big effort that we should do.
Just building up on that point on the news, if I recall correctly, basically what was being said is that some areas there were a bit more sort of a cold desert climate, aka had a climate that was perhaps too cold for a formation of precipitation that eventually becomes more ice, are now receiving more of these sort of snow that before wasn't happening. As the same is sort of happening in the middle of Greenland, where the glacier is increasing a bit, but the edges is decreasing. So it's in specific areas that perhaps before there was a very stable sort of situation, and now there's variability because the climate is slightly warmer. And then, of course, this message was then misused. A part was isolated, so glaciers are growing, we don't have to worry. I think it's an interesting point. Thank you also for bringing this. Remember it a bit.
Yeah. It's okay. I take the opportunity because now we're standing here. Lo siento por el resto, pido disculpas, but we have a little gift for you guys from the university. So I'll give to you maybe now or when we go to the lunch. But I want to, Laura, y si me ayuda, I want to give to you, some very, that's a kind of amabilidad here in Chile. So a little remember of your visit to the Universidad de Chile. And there we have also for you, but there maybe later we can give to you. So we will discuss about this all the afternoon. So, but I take the opportunity to say thanks for coming here and give this opportunity to talk about these items. So, thank you. Gracias.
Okay, muchas gracias. Now we'll continue to a discussion which Professor Ganguly will introduce with a bit of context. Vamos a seguir a una pequeña discusión en grupos que va a presentar el profesor. What's that? Keep this one? Okay. Let me just
go back
let me just find yours so you can change.
No, you don't have to find mine. Just go back a little bit. This is good. One more. We had that circle thing. One more. Yes, keep it there. I don't need my slides.
Okay. We're going to put this one up after, but you can go ahead with. Sorry, one second.
All right. So I will. I have already, spoken to most of you about many of the things. I don't need to talk too much about the same things that you have heard before, but just wanted to make a quick comment or two based on his slides, based on Jose's slides, or at least this one slide. Couple of things to remember from what we have heard today. Jose talked about Isaac Asimov. How many of you have heard about Isaac Asimov? Some of you have, okay. Yeah, I know you have. So he's a very big science fiction writer of our times. So Jose, for me at least, these guys, Linnea and Francisco would be kids' age.
And those guys would almost be grandkids' age by now. So I don't know if you've heard about all the things we have read. But Isaac Asimov, in his science fiction, had this interesting point that he made about what he called psychohistory. This is in his Foundation series, trying to develop mathematical and what would now probably be called AI. At that time, it was not that big a deal. But computational models to understand how humans behave and how not individual humans behave, but how humans behave as a collective society. And since this was science fiction, he was, of course, talking about, he was talking about galaxies and galactic empires, and you need collective galaxies to be able to make sense of, or to get some deeper understanding of what these things mean. I have been to many parts of the world, and many of the scientific research organizations that we have, Jose was talking about NSF, the National Science Foundation. There is the National Institutes of Health, NIH, there is NASA. And these are considered our crown jewels, I mean, for the US, and there are many countries around the world which try to emulate these things. So if you look at it from the point of view of psychohistory, sometimes sudden bursts of change can cause long-term, sometimes potentially irreversible damage in terms of how what this could mean. Some of these things we can impact, some of these things at least I cannot impact. But it's useful to remember that and see ways in which we can still try and do something. Jose talked about Michael Mann, M-A-N-N, of the hockey stick effect. So what he showed is that climate change there has been sudden increase in temperature based on greenhouse gas emissions, a very strong increase which he called this hockey stick effect, relative to very long-term changes that have been happening. But especially this change is important because us humans are existing in this current climate, and we haven't seen this magnitude of change. Now this got a lot of, Michael Mann got a lot of kudos from some people, but also a lot of flack from some others, because they said that, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty here. A lot is being lost in the details. And I have read some of these things carefully. Some of the things you could say, yes, there is more that we can learn. That is true of many different things in climate. There's always more that we can learn, and we have to be careful not to sound too alarmist. But there is also, there's a scientist called Stephen Schneider is the late Stephen Schneider now, but he was considered one of the top climate scientists in the world. One thing he said is we have to be very careful to differentiate between climate skeptics and climate deniers. So from his perspective, see, we call about, do you believe in climate change? We talk about that. Well, there's nothing to believe in. This is not religion. This is science. And if it is science, you don't believe. You develop hypotheses, and then you see if you have a way of falsifying that hypothesis. And if you cannot falsify, then you say, well, maybe I start to accept that hypothesis. So that's the first thing. But when he talked about climate skeptics versus climate deniers, he was talking about climate skeptics being those who are always questioning the best understanding of the science in the hope of possibly improving it. Is this accurate? Is there some variability that we don't understand, and can we improve? And his point was that is very much needed, just like any other science, since this is not a belief. If it's a belief system, and personally I have nothing against belief systems, for or against, but it's different from science. You have to understand that. If it's science, it has to always progress in some way or the other, and there will have to be people who will question that. So skeptics are welcome. Deniers are a bit different. Deniers are, whatever proof comes, the end result for them is assured. we will not do this, we will not do XYZ about fossil fuels, we will not do XYZ about taking care of the environment. That is the end result. And then there's whatever evidence comes in, there may be multiple lines of evidence, you say, well, let me see, no, this is wrong because ultimately I won't do this. So there is, it's a, for them it's probably more like a religion. They don't need data, they don't need hypotheses or to show any hypothesis. They know the end result. So let's say fossil fuel is my new God, and that cannot be questioned, and then everything else comes from there. So if you're thinking about deniers, you have to be a bit careful. Now, how much do we need to know? How exact do we need to be before we can say that, okay, this is how we design policy? So if you think about the flu vaccine, we had an influenza-like illness as a pandemic recently, right? What we call COVID. If you think of the flu vaccine, there is so much we don't know. We have a lot of data, we have this. COVID, we didn't even have enough data. But there's so much we don't know. But we know enough to say that roughly around this time of the year, take a flu vaccine, and it seems to help, right? Now, some people will argue about that. That's a whole other thing. But we know enough to design certain kinds of policy, or don't, huddle too much in groups, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know everything about the flu vaccine, but we know how, certain things so that decisions can be made and policies can be designed. As our knowledge improves, hopefully these can be further refined, but we at least know something. Question is, how much do we know about climate change variability right now to make sure that we can have some credible policies and decisions, policies whether they are at global scales, whether they're national scales, urban scales, at the scale of each individual farm. How much do we know? Which still allows us to make decisions and policies, and how much we can further improve to be able to refine. So from that perspective, if you think about Michael Mann's hockey stick, yes, there were a lot of things he said which needs further refinements, and somebody else, a mathematician, can question, but wait a second, the p-value that you use here is, et cetera, et cetera. But did we know enough to be able to say that you need to be a bit careful? Yes. One other thing, just as an aside, that Michael Mann says these days and has been saying for a while is, when you hear too much about here is what individuals should do, about being environmentally sustainable and about climate and all of that is true, all of that raises a civic sense, and that should be done. But it shouldn't be done as an either or, because it's often that corporations, policymakers, the one who need to do certain things about the big things, right, about what you do with fossil fuels, those are the kind of things you have to change. Those are the kind of policies that needs to change, and that should not just shift to, oh, you do your individual actions and I'm fine. There has to be much more than that at a coordinated level. And one thing I think often is about smoking. So there used to be a time when in the US, not too long ago, maybe one and a half generations before me also, so for you, several generations before you, when people would, when professors would come on the classroom with a pipe or a smoke, and no big deal, right? I mean, you'd go along, airplanes, there'd be all these things. Now, how did that change? If you think about it, there was similar vested interest from the industry lobby. But it changed from a lot of it in the US, at least. I don't know about every place, but in the US it changed from kids. There were education, and the young people said, Dad, I don't want you to die, or Mom, I don't want you to die, right? Things like that. So there are cases, right? There have been situations before when things have changed. Could this change a little bit? Potentially. Should we be overly alarmist? For sure not. But should we also say that here are things we know and certain things should be done? Yes. So I'd like to leave with 3 thoughts here, which we have again discussed. Let me mention them first, and Linnea has also, mentioned that we should tell you a bit about, the implications of this. So the first thing is a big sounding phrase, but I'll explain what this means. Physics constrained non-stationarity. What we are talking about in the world of climate is something like this: physics constrained non-stationarity. What do we mean? So the climate of Santiago, or Boston for that matter, will probably not be like a Mars or Venus or Mercury within 30 years, 100 years, even 1,000 years probably. Very, very, very long time, I don't know. They say that Mars had flowing water and all that. That is a whole different time scale. But in the time scales that we often consider, we are not talking about sudden complete changes that are make our planet or our cities belonging to another planet. But what we are talking about, and I cannot give the best example with Santiago because I don't know so much, but let's say Boston looking like some city in North Carolina, right, in 30 years. So there is a physics. It's not like it can be the change of climate within any parts of the world can be so much that it defies the laws of physics. It's not like that. Or the change is so much that it defies the laws of physics. I mean, Mars also follows physics just as we do here on Earth. But the change, I mean, we're not expecting that rapid change. We're still expecting change which follows the laws of physics, but things can alter in different parts of the Earth, which makes our life difficult. So it's not necessarily when we say that we are saving the planet Earth, what we really mean, we are saving ourselves, humanity as a species on planet Earth, right? And the kind of change that you're expecting in different places, so any change, fundamental change that's beyond statistical variability, that's what's called non-stationarity. And that will happen in a physics constrained way, but that may cause significant impact for us humans, such as loss of glaciers. Loss of glaciers in some parts of the world may mean significant floods and deluge initially, and then droughts for very long-term mega drought kind of situation. Exactly what happens may be different in each part of the world. The second thing out of three, so I'm about to end. The second thing is climate change and variability. So we have to think about not just overall change, but also variability. I was talking about, the first speaker here. She was talking about how resilience of species and thermal performance curves, meaning how do these species behave? And you're talking about insects, pollinators, bees, and so on, which are ectotherms, which are cold-blooded animals, so they cannot adapt. So after a point, they die off. Beyond a certain temperature range, they just die off. And even their ability to thrive within a certain temperature range can change a lot, right? So climate impacts them in significant ways. So I was talking about Kate's paper. Previously, people had found that, researchers had found that as climate increases, the change in mean temperature will cause certain impacts on these insects, right? And insects are, by the way, foundational for ecosystems in general. So then, as the mean temperature changes, here are the different changes that will happen. And there were a lot of, different kinds of things. Yes, this part will be bad, this part will be good, this part will not have any effect, etc., etc. But what Kate did is, she said, how about we look at also the variability, the changes in variability. And that's also something that will change because of climate. Not just a mean change, but changes in variability. And when you think of changes in variability, what that means is that at some point, in certain years, certain time periods, you'll have higher temperatures. Many of the time it will be higher because it's a mean change plus that variability. But there will be some times when it will be colder. So you'll have cold spells persisting. Now what happens is from both of these ends, at both of these ends, some insects will die there, some insects will die here. So what she found is what she called a quasi extinction rate for about 95% as you grow, as we go in the forward in this century. So that was in Nature Climate Change a couple of years back. So that's about climate change and variability. The other thing I wanted to say is this concept that the US Department of Defense used to call threat multiplier. So now what they call, I don't know, I'll have to talk to my DoD contacts, but threat multiplier, climate change is a threat multiplier. What that means is that it's not always that everything that's happening in the world is only because of climate change. Of course, we know that, right? It's not just climate change. In some cases, climate is one contributor, in maybe a small contributor. In some cases, it's a large contributor. Some cases, it doesn't have an impact. In some other cases, it's one of probably the most important contributor. When you sum all of that up across sectors, across different regions, it becomes an enormous contributor. But it's a threat multiplier in many cases. So think of water treaties around the world, right? And how scarcity of water might impact treaties, which can in turn sometimes lead to conflict situations around the world. Hopefully, not just conflict, hopefully there'll be peace games rather than war games of climate, and hopefully instead of conflict, people will realize that no, if we can use our water resources well, since we have to because of these things that are changing, so that's one point that we can agree on. There was a few years back, people were surprised to read in the New York Times that Israel and Jordan have signed an agreement that they will share water, and Israel is one of the top, leading countries in terms of their use of water and what to do with water, and the entire Middle East suffers from that, right? So despite all the challenges, they were able to, somewhat secretly at first, but come up with this and then say, here's what we have, right? And this is just one example. There are many examples like that, but certain kinds of stresses like this. Then if you think of cities, one of the iconic city that's considered to be impacted by climate change is Jakarta in Indonesia. So this is a case of a large city in one of the most populated countries of the world. I believe Indonesia is the fourth most populated country in the world. Jakarta is considered an iconic example of what climate change would mean. And as a consideration of these are the kinds of situation we could expect because of climate change, it makes sense. But some of the major contributors there are not just climate change, a lot of people, a lot of inequity. So development happening exactly in those places where already groundwater has been abstracted, water quality is bad, everybody has to take water from the ground, especially the poor people, and that causes land subduction, and over and above that there is development. So all of these factors, groundwater, humans, all of these contribute to the thing, and then there is climate variability because of El Nino, and among other things, and climate change, which is exacerbating. So as of now, Indonesia is thinking of moving their capital, probably the only such example in modern times where they're moving because of broadly sustainability issues, moving their capital to another place. Again, threat multiplier. It's not the only thing. There are some places where climate is the main issue. Some places there are other sustainability considerations, but climate acting as threat multiplier. So you heard all of these things. Hopefully you got some interesting challenges, ideas, things from here. And we'll have some ways to collect all of that wisdom that you have now obtained from all of the faculty here and maybe do some write-ups, reflections, discussions on that. But with that, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. And thanks for your attention. This is a very interesting slide, and at some point we can discuss each of these things and what is being done in the US, what is being done here, what each of us is doing, so we can talk about that.
Just as a small introduction to our discussion that we'll have this afternoon. we were talking before, about this huskies have already seen. And, sorry, no, it's not changing. And this as well. So we've already been talking about this context. I think now there's not too many other people in the room, actually. But yeah, so I don't want to introduce it too much, but to the people that are here, we have been talking about how these three components, chaos and natural variability, the cascading failures in complex networks, maybe more human and ecological networks, and on complex social systems, all compounding together to create risk and just making a context where solving a problem like climate change becomes more complex. And this will guide a bit our discussion for this afternoon. And there are also some other guiding areas that I think from the presentations that we had this morning. I think the issue of governance of creating policies versus implementing them, the case of not just thinking at like on present time, but of looking at the geomorphological history of the country and how that affects what could happen in the future. And I think one key lesson I take from Jose's presentation, the questions after, is about communication of the science to people. So with those guiding ideas, go to the...
Can you go to the first slide one more time?
Okay.
Just one quick question.
Too many things open. This one and yeah. Sorry, 1 second.
That's fine.
1 second. This intro slide.
Yeah,
Yes.
So I think I may have told you, but if not, the picture on the top left, do you know where this is from?
The Himalayas.
Yeah, this is the best viewpoint of Mount Everest. This is called Kalapathar, so this is, yes, Himalayas. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Talking of glaciers.
Yeah, a lot of parallels in experience around the world here. 1 second. So, and these are the points of discussion. So in groups, we'll look into these things. And with the guiding principles that I just mentioned, I think we can go together to lunch in groups and already kind of during lunch start discussing, and then we'll come back here for some final discussion and any final questions to the presenters.
And also a lot of interest here, right, from what I saw from the dean who was here. I mean, all of them had to go because of meetings and such, but I'll keep on talking with them. A lot of interest in having these kind of cultural exchanges with all of you. So I will try to do what I can, whether it's with my research groups, whether it's through another dialogue. Next year's dialogue won't happen here because those planning processes start way back, but if I knew everything, then I'd probably have done it again here. But also for all of you, if you are interested, for example, in co-ops. Co-ops are basically
Internship.
internships. That is very much encouraged at Northeastern. Any of those kind of things, if you like something, whether it's the orchard we visited, whether it's the university that we are here, any of these things, let us know, let Linnea and Francisco know, let me know. If you have their contacts, feel free to directly connect whatever works. But that is great. I mean, people have really enjoyed these kind of experiences, often starting from the dialogue across the world. If you have an interest, follow up on that.
Okay, maybe if we could already see who's in which group. I think based on the groups that were made yesterday, was it yesterday? Yesterday morning? Yeah. So who did the first topic? Did anybody do the first topic?
It was the fires. Oh, yes.
Yeah, Leo and, okay, and Nate, okay. Who did the second topic? Okay, yeah. And the third one, anybody? Okay, I changed the region, by the way, just to make it interesting. And the last topic? Okay, nice. And will you join us this afternoon or for lunch? Oh, okay. Well, anyway, then within our group, we'll discuss these things. And yeah, with that, we'll go to lunch. Thank you. Yes, thank you, thank you.